By the time Lord Adrian Vexley ruined her in front of half a drawing-room, Miss Verity Lorne had already learned how to lower her eyes without appearing defeated. London, 1856, glittered beyond the tall windows of Lady Octavia Pell's Mayfair house, where carriage lamps moved through the mist like restless stars and every silver spoon seemed polished to reflect a person's rank. Inside, beneath chandeliers trembling with candlelight, ladies in silk spoke softly enough to seem kind and loudly enough to wound. Verity stood near the tea-table with a folded napkin in her hand, not because she had been asked to serve, exactly, but because in Lady Octavia's house no one needed to ask. A poor relation learned the shape of usefulness. She learned when a cup was empty before its owner noticed. She learned when a conversation required her silence. She learned how to become part of the furniture and still keep her spine straight. Her plain grey coat lay over a chair by the door, brushed clean though the cuffs were worn. One ivory button, mended by her own careful hand after her mother's old stitches had loosened, caught the candlelight whenever the door opened. It looked humble among all that satin and velvet. It looked honest. Verity loved it for that. "My dear Miss Lorne," Lady Octavia said, her smile as delicate as porcelain and twice as cold, "you need not hover so anxiously. Lord Adrian is perfectly capable of finding his own tea." A few guests smiled. Not enough to be cruel. Just enough to show they had heard. Verity placed the napkin down. "Of course, Lady Octavia." Lord Adrian Vexley lounged beside the mantel with the lazy confidence of a gentleman who had never had to wonder whether a roof would remain above his head. He was the younger son of the Marquis of Belmere, handsome in the polished, careless way society rewarded, with pale hair, fine gloves, and a mouth made for compliments he did not mean. For 3 months he had walked with Verity in gardens, praised her handwriting, borrowed her opinions when they suited him, and looked at her just long enough to make Lady Octavia speak of settlements in half-finished sentences. Verity had not been foolish enough to dream wildly. She had been foolish enough to hope quietly. That was worse. Quiet hopes had roots. They did not fall easily. "Adrian," Lady Octavia continued, turning toward him with an air of amusement, "Miss Lorne has grown rather solemn this evening. Perhaps she has mistaken kindness for a promise." The words made the room sharpen around Verity. She felt it in the turn of heads, in the pause before a cup touched its saucer, in the little inhale of Mrs. Bullant, who adored calamity so long as it wore gloves. Verity looked at Adrian. She waited for him to laugh away the insult. She waited for the smallest sign that he remembered the afternoon in Berkeley Square when he had said, "You understand me better than anyone, Verity. You don't know what that means to me." He did not look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced. "Lady Octavia exaggerates," he said lightly. "Miss Lorne is sensible. She knows what is possible." "Do I?" Verity asked before she could teach herself not to. The question was soft, but it reached him. It reached everyone. Adrian's eyes narrowed by a fraction. The room did not move. "Verity," Lady Octavia said, warning wrapped in sweetness. Verity did not turn. She could feel her pulse at the base of her throat. She could also feel something else, something steadier beneath the hurt. A line had been crossed. She was standing on one side of it, and if she stepped back now, she would spend the rest of her life pretending she had not seen it. "My lord," she said, "if your attentions were only amusement, you should say so plainly." A lady near the pianoforte lowered her fan. Someone by the window whispered, then stopped. Adrian gave a small laugh, but it had lost its ease. "This is hardly the place for sentiment." "No," Verity said. "It is the place for truth, since there are so many witnesses to improve it." His face changed then. Not much. Just enough for her to see the vanity beneath the charm. Lady Octavia's fingers tightened on her reticule. "Miss Lorne, you forget yourself." "I am trying not to," Verity replied. That made Adrian straighten. Pride, when pricked, often mistook itself for courage. "Very well," he said. "Since you require plainness, I shall give it. You have been pleasant company. Useful company. But do not imagine that a few walks and civil remarks have made you indispensable." Verity heard the word useful as if it had been placed in her hand, cold and small. "Indispensable," she repeated. No, Adrian smiled, and this time there was no kindness left in it. I can find 100 women like you. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. Verity felt the sentence strike, but she did not sway. She saw, with painful clarity, every face that refused to meet hers. Lady Octavia looked more frightened than satisfied, which was strange. Adrian looked relieved, as though cruelty had simplified a problem. Verity looked at the man she had nearly trusted and discovered that the worst of it was not that he had never loved her. It was that he had believed her gratitude would survive anything. She folded her hands once, then released them. "Then you are fortunate, my lord," she said, her voice low and steady. "You will not miss one." Adrian's smile faded. "Don't be dramatic, Verity." "I'm not." She turned away before he could answer. The distance to the door was not great, yet it felt like crossing a ballroom with every candle raised against her. She heard Lady Octavia's quick whisper behind her. "Verity, stop. You will make this impossible." Verity paused beside the chair and picked up her grey coat. The wool was thin, familiar beneath her fingers. She found the repaired ivory button and fastened it with deliberate care. Once, when she was 17 and newly orphaned, her mother's old maid had told her that a lady was not measured by what she owned, but by what she refused to sell. Verity had not understood then. She understood now. She turned back to the room and gave Lady Octavia a curtsy so precise that no one could call it insolence. "Thank you for your hospitality." Lady Octavia's face drained of colour. "You cannot leave this house alone during the season." "I believe I just can." "You have nowhere respectable to go." The word slipped out too quickly. Too honestly. A flicker passed through Lady Octavia's eyes, not concern, but calculation interrupted. Verity noticed it. So did someone else. She sensed him before she saw him, a tall figure at the open drawing-room door, dark against the warmer light of the hall. The newly arrived gentleman had removed his hat, but not his expression of grave restraint. He wore black evening clothes without ornament, and the room knew him before any servant announced him. Conversations bent toward him. Shoulders adjusted. Even Adrian lost some of his careless height. Alistair Rowe, Duke of Caldermere, stood at the threshold as though he had been carved from winter and command. Verity had seen him only once before across a crowded opera house, where every ambitious mother in London had watched him like a coronet made flesh. He was not young in the boyish way Adrian was young. He was a man formed by discipline, silence, and the habit of being obeyed. His gaze moved from Verity's fastened coat to Adrian's stiffened mouth, then to Lady Octavia's too white face. He had heard. Verity knew it with a certainty that should have humiliated her further, yet did not. The Duke's expression held no pity. That was what stopped her breath. He did not look at her as if she had been made small. He looked at the room as if the room had been found lacking. "Lady Octavia," he said, bowing with perfect civility. "Forgive my late arrival." His voice was quiet, but every person listened. Lady Octavia recovered enough to flutter a hand. "Your Grace, we were not expecting you quite so soon." "Clearly." Adrian stepped forward, irritation fighting with caution. "Caldermere, this is a private family matter." The Duke looked at him. "Then you should not have conducted it before guests." A faint sound passed through the room, not a laugh, but the ghost of one quickly buried. Adrian reddened. Verity gripped the coat at her throat. She did not want rescue if rescue meant becoming another object passed between powerful hands. Yet the Duke did not approach her. He did not claim authority over her. He simply shifted one step, enough to clear the doorway. Enough to offer passage. "Miss Lorne," he said, as if her name deserved the same care as any duchess's, "your carriage has not been called." "No, Your Grace." "Do you wish it called?" The question was so simple that for a moment she could not answer. No one had asked what she wished since the sentence had fallen. Perhaps long before that. Lady Octavia moved sharply. "Your Grace, Miss Lorne is overwrought. She does not understand the consequences." Verity looked at the Duke, then at Adrian, then at the faces waiting for her to break. Her fingers found the ivory button once more. It held. So would she. "I understand enough," she said. "I wish to leave." The Duke inclined his head, not to command her, but to acknowledge the choice. Then the door is yours. Adrian gave a strained laugh and reached for his gloves. This has gone far enough. I shall speak with her outside. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You will remain where you are, Lord Adrian. The younger man froze. Lady Octavia whispered his name, sharp with warning. Verity stepped past them all. No one stopped her. At the threshold, she felt the chill from the hall touch her face and realized she had not cried. Behind her, the drawing room remained bright, crowded, and merciless. Before her lay the misted street, uncertain and dark. She walked toward it anyway. Only when she reached the first stair did she hear the Duke's measured footsteps follow, not close enough to compromise her, not far enough to abandon her. And in Lady Octavia's drawing room, where a man had said he could find 100 women like her, the silence he left behind proved that not one of them knew what to do with the woman who had chosen herself. The night air beyond Lady Octavia Pell's door was colder than Verity expected, and for one brief, foolish instant, the chill felt less frightening than the warmth she had left behind. Warm rooms could still be cruel. Chandeliers could still witness a person being made small. Outside, the Mayfair mist clung to the iron railings and blurred the lamps along the street, turning every waiting carriage into a dark, silent shape. Verity descended the steps with her gloved hand tight around the edge of her grey coat, aware of the house behind her, aware of the Duke several paces back, and aware most sharply that she had no carriage waiting. That fact settled over her only after the door closed. She had walked out with dignity. Dignity, however, did not tell a woman where to sleep. Her pulse faltered. She had a few coins in the small purse at her wrist, not enough for comfort, perhaps enough for a hired cab if one could be found quickly. Bloomsbury was not impossible. Mrs. Dacre lived there if she still kept the same respectable rooms near Russell Square. The former governess had written once at Christmas, in a careful hand, saying Verity must call if ever she found herself in need. At the time, Verity had kissed the letter and hidden it beneath her linen. Need had seemed like a distant shore then. Now it stood under her feet. Miss Lorne. The Duke's voice did not startle her because she had been listening for it. That unsettled her more than if he had appeared suddenly. She turned on the pavement. Alistair Rowe, Duke of Caldermere, stood at the foot of the steps, hat in hand, his dark coat severe against the pale fog. He had not followed too closely. He had not called after her in the hall. He had allowed her to reach the street as if the leaving belonged to her. That courtesy was so exact it made her throat tighten. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice sounded composed. She was almost proud of it. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "It is not my intention to direct your movements." "Then you are unlike most people this evening." The words escaped before she could soften them. His eyes changed, not with offense, but with the faintest recognition. "So it appears." A carriage rolled past at the end of the street, its wheels hissing over damp stones. Verity looked toward it, then away. She would not ask him for help. She would not stand outside a house that had humiliated her and let the first powerful man who noticed decide what should become of her. "I am going to Bloomsbury," she said, as if she had arranged it all. "To a Mrs. Dacre. She was once governess to the Ellison girls. She keeps respectable rooms." "Is she expecting you?" "No. Do you know whether she is at home?" "No. Do you have a servant with you?" Verity held his gaze. "You know that I do not." The answer should have made her feel exposed. Instead, it steadied her. A truth spoken plainly had edges one could hold. The Duke glanced once toward the house. Behind an upper window, a curtain stirred. "I have no wish to make your situation more difficult," he said. "A lady walking alone across London at this hour will invite speculation from people less honourable than they believe themselves to be. My carriage is at the corner. It contains my aunt's maid, my footman, and an elderly groom who has been in my household longer than I have held the title. If you choose, they can convey you to Mrs. Dacre's door. I will not ride inside." Verity stared at him. She had expected command, perhaps pity disguised as authority. She had not expected an arrangement built so carefully around her reputation. "You have considered every objection," she said. "Not every objection." Only the obvious ones. And if I refuse? Then I shall ask my footman to walk at a distance until you find a safer conveyance. If you refuse that as well, I will remain here and hope your courage has better protection than London usually offers. It was the gentlest rebuke she had ever received. She looked down the misted street. The houses stood grand and blind, each window holding secrets behind velvet curtains. Her anger had carried her out. Anger could not carry her 3 miles in thin shoes while every passing driver measured the worth of an unescorted woman. She hated that he was right. She hated more that he had not forced her to admit it. Your Grace, she said slowly, I cannot repay such assistance. I did not ask for repayment. People often do not ask aloud. Then allow me to be plain. You will owe me nothing. Her fingers tightened over the repaired button. Men have said kind things to me before when they wanted credit for them later. For the first time, something cold moved across his face, but it was not directed at her. Then they were making purchases, not offering kindness. The front door opened behind them. Light spilled onto the steps. Lord Adrian Vexley appeared without his hat, gloves crushed in one hand, his expression sharpened by embarrassment. Verity, this performance has gone quite far enough. Verity turned before the Duke could answer. I am not performing. Adrian descended 2 steps. You are upset. I understand that. But walking out into the street like this does not improve your position. My position was made clear indoors. For heaven's sake, don't pretend you have somewhere better to go. The word struck less deeply than before because they no longer surprised her. That was its own sadness. The Duke moved only a fraction, but the street seemed to alter around him. Lord Adrian, he said. You were instructed to remain where you were. Adrian's jaw tightened. With respect, Caldermere, Miss Lorne is connected to my family's circle. I have some right to speak with her. You have the right to lower your voice. The simplicity of it silenced him. A footman at the corner looked straight ahead with impressive discipline. Verity could feel the house watching through walls and curtains. She knew how this would be told by morning if she faltered. The poor relation regretted her scene. The Duke interfered. Lord Adrian behaved generously. Lady Octavia suffered. No, my lord, Verity said to Adrian, you have said everything necessary. You will regret this by breakfast. Perhaps. But I shall regret it somewhere else. Adrian flushed. You cannot simply leave Lady Octavia's protection. Protection is an interesting name for a locked door. That landed. She saw it in the quick flare of alarm behind his eyes. The Duke saw it too. Verity did not yet understand why the phrase had frightened Adrian, but she stored the reaction away. It joined Lady Octavia's panic, the mention of papers, the strange certainty that they needed her more than they wished anyone to know. Adrian took one more step down. The Duke's voice did not rise. Do not. That was all. 2 words, quiet as snowfall, and Adrian stopped. Verity had seen men bluster. She had seen men flatter. She had rarely seen one obeyed by silence alone. A dark carriage drew up then, the Caldermere crest barely visible in the lamplight. A maid sat inside, middle-aged and proper, with folded hands and a face trained not to be curious. The footman opened the door and lowered the step. The elderly groom touched his hat from the box. Everything about the arrangement said respectable. Everything said witnessed. Verity looked once more at the house she had left. Lady Octavia stood in the doorway now, pale and composed by force. Verity, she called, her voice sweet enough for neighbors, you are overwrought. Come inside, and we shall discuss this privately. Privately. The word chilled Verity more than the fog. Private rooms had swallowed too much of her life. Private corrections. Private obligations. Private gratitude demanded for bread she had earned. She lifted her chin. Good night, Lady Octavia. The older woman's eyes flashed. You are making a grave mistake. It will be mine, then. Verity stepped into the carriage. The maid shifted to give her room and offered a respectful nod. Miss Lorne. Thank you, Verity whispered. The Duke remained on the pavement. Mrs. Dacre's direction, he asked. Verity gave it. He repeated it to the coachman, then added, "You will drive directly there. Mrs. Hobb will accompany Miss Lorne to the door and confirm she is received." "Yes, Your Grace," the footman said. Verity looked at the Duke through the open carriage door. Candlelight from the house touched one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. "You are not coming." "No, because of propriety. Because you have chosen a destination, and my presence inside that carriage would make your choice appear to be mine." She had no answer for that. Something inside her, braced for insult and command, did not know what to do with carefulness. "Thank you," she said, and disliked how small the word sounded beside what he had preserved. His gaze lowered briefly to her coat. "Your baton," he said. Verity looked down. The repaired ivory button was gone. For one sharp second, grief rose absurdly high in her chest. It was only a button. It was not only a button. Her mother's thread had held there once. The Duke bent and picked something from the damp edge of the pavement near the carriage step. He held it out on his gloved palm. The little ivory circle looked dull in the fog, almost weightless. Verity reached for it, but her hand trembled. She stilled it before anyone could pity her. He seemed to notice the effort and not the tremor. "May I keep it safe until it can be properly mended?" he asked. "Not may I keep it. Not I shall. May I?" Verity searched his face for mockery and found none. "It has very little value, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked." The quiet answer unsettled her more than praise would have. She nodded once. Then yes. He closed his fingers around the button as if accepting a charge. The carriage door shut. As the horses moved forward, Verity kept her eyes on the window until the Duke, Adrian, Lady Octavia, and the bright cruel house blurred into mist. Only then did she let out the breath she had held since the drawing-room. Across from her, Mrs. Hobb looked down at her folded hands and said, with careful kindness, "Mrs. Dacre is a good woman, miss. His Grace would not send you otherwise." Verity turned toward the dark glass. She could see only her own reflection, pale but upright, wrapped in a coat now missing one button. "I hope she is at home," she said. Behind them, in Lady Octavia's house, the guests had begun speaking all at once. Lady Octavia did not join them. She went instead to the small escritoire in the morning room, unlocked the lower drawer with a key hidden beneath her bracelet, and took out a letter addressed in a solicitor's firm hand to Miss Verity Lorne. For a moment she stared at the name as if ink itself had betrayed her. Then she folded the letter twice, placed it beneath a stack of household accounts, turned the key again, and held it in her fist until the metal marked her palm. By morning, Verity Lorne had discovered that a respectable room could still feel like the edge of a cliff. Mrs. Dacre received her at a little past midnight with a lamp in one hand, a shawl around her shoulders, and not a single question that could not wait until daylight. That kindness had nearly undone Verity more than Lady Octavia's cruelty. Now pale winter light pressed through the narrow windows of the Bloomsbury sitting room, touching the worn carpet, the neat bookcase, and the tea tray Mrs. Dacre had insisted upon bringing herself. The house smelled faintly of lavender, coal smoke, and old paper. It was not grand. It was not fashionable. It was safe, and safety had a sound Verity had forgotten. It was the soft clink of a cup placed down without judgment. It was Mrs. Dacre saying, "You may remain until we discover the wisest course," instead of asking what Verity had done to deserve shelter. Verity sat near the small hearth in the grey coat she had not yet taken off, because removing it felt like admitting she had nowhere else to go. One button was missing. Her fingers kept finding the empty place before she could stop them. The Duke had kept the ivory button with such grave care that the memory unsettled her. She was not accustomed to men who asked permission before preserving something fragile. "Eat a little more," Mrs. Dacre said, placing bread beside the tea. "You look as though pride is all you have had for breakfast." Verity gave a faint smile. "Pride is more filling than one expects." "Nonsense. It is notorious for leaving a person hollow by noon." The older woman's voice was brisk, but her eyes were gentle. She had been governess to half a dozen aristocratic girls and feared no drawing-room, which made her one of the bravest women Verity knew. Before Verity could answer, the maid brought in a note on a salver. The paper was thick, cream-coloured, and sealed with Lady Octavia Pell's small oval crest. Verity's hand went cold before she broke the wax. "My dear Verity," the note began, in the elegant hand that had signed so many commands as if they were favors. "You acted last evening under distress and wounded feeling. Such scenes, once repeated by careless tongues, may do lasting harm to a young woman without fortune or immediate family protection. Return by 11, apologize to Lord Adrian for your misapprehension, and all may yet be managed quietly. I remain willing to overlook your ingratitude, provided you show sense before society forces my hand." Verity read it once. Then again. The word ingratitude seemed to darken the page. Mrs. Dacre watched her over the rim of her spectacles. Bad news? Expected news. There is very little difference when one is tired. Verity folded the note with care. For years, Lady Octavia had taught her that composure meant obedience with a pleasant expression. Now Verity discovered it could mean something else. It could mean placing an insult neatly on a table and refusing to let it become instruction. "May I use your writing desk?" she asked. Mrs. Dacre's mouth softened. "Of course." Verity crossed to the little desk by the window. Her hand trembled only when she dipped the pen. She waited until it steadied. Lady Octavia had received enough of her hurried apologies, enough careful phrases designed to soothe tempers she had not caused. This letter would be short. "Madam," she wrote, "I am grateful for past shelter, but I cannot return to a house where my dignity is treated as an inconvenience. I shall not apologize to Lord Adrian for understanding his words. Please send any personal belongings that are mine to Mrs. Dacre's direction. Verity Lorne." She sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it without flourish. When she looked up, Mrs. Dacre was watching as if she had seen a pupil complete an examination no one else knew had been set. "There," Verity said. "Now I am ruined in excellent penmanship." "Not ruined," Mrs. Dacre said. "Merely inconvenient to people who relied upon your silence." The words warmed Verity for one brief moment. Then practical fear returned. She had no income. She had no near family willing to offend Lady Octavia. Her few gowns were still at Pell House, along with her books, her mother's small workbox, and the letters she kept tied with blue thread. She could not impose upon Mrs. Dacre forever. A woman could leave a house on courage, but she could not live on courage alone. At 10:30, the maid appeared again, this time with a card held as carefully as if it might alter the furniture. Mrs. Dacre read the name and lifted her brows. Lady Honoria Rowe. And the Duke of Caldermere. Verity stood too quickly. "Here?" "In my front parlour, unless the maid has begun inventing dukes for amusement." Verity looked down at her plain gown, which had been brushed but not improved by daylight. "I am not dressed to receive callers." Mrs. Dacre gave her a dry look. "My dear, you received disaster last night in a mended coat. A duchess's aunt will not finish you." The line almost made Verity laugh. Almost. She followed Mrs. Dacre into the front parlour, where Lady Honoria Rowe rose from a chair with elegant difficulty and the Duke stood near the window, allowing his aunt the room's centre as propriety required. Lady Honoria was a widow of perhaps 60, dressed in deep violet silk with silver hair arranged beneath a lace cap. Her face possessed the calm authority of a woman who had survived scandal by refusing to find it interesting. The Duke bowed. "Miss Lorne." "Your Grace." Lady Honoria came forward and offered both hands, not as an intimate, but as a woman making a public statement in private form. "My dear Miss Lorne, I am sorry to intrude upon a morning that has already asked too much of you." "You are very kind, Lady Honoria." "Sometimes. Not always. But I am practical almost without interruption, and that is more useful." The Duke's gaze flickered briefly, as if he had heard that sentence many times and lost every argument with it. Lady Honoria sat, then waited until Verity had done the same. "My nephew tells me you require a respectable arrangement while certain foolish people recover their senses. I require a companion for the next several weeks. My last one married a curate and abandoned me to my correspondence, which was inconsiderate but morally admirable. The position is paid. The duties are real. You would read to me when my eyes are tired, answer notes, accompany me on calls, and prevent me from accepting invitations from women who speak for 20 minutes without arriving at a thought." Verity stared at her. Lady Honoria, I could not accept charity disguised as employment. Nor would I offer it. Charity makes both parties uncomfortable when employment will do perfectly well. You have excellent handwriting, better manners than most girls with twice your dowry, and, according to my nephew, the rare ability to remain calm while surrounded by fools. I consider that a qualification. Verity glanced at the Duke despite herself. Your Grace said that. His expression remained composed. In fewer words. In colder ones, Lady Honoria added. But the admiration survived. Verity felt heat rise to her face and looked at her hands. I am grateful, but Lady Octavia will say I have attached myself to your household for advantage. Lady Octavia will say whatever causes Lady Octavia the least inconvenience, Lady Honoria replied. That is not a reason to let her write the facts. The Duke spoke then, quietly. My aunt's household is established, respectable, and dull enough to disarm gossip. You would not be under my roof. You would be under hers. That mattered. He knew it mattered. Verity felt the carefulness of the arrangement, each piece placed not to trap her, but to leave her standing. And if I decline, she asked. Lady Honoria smiled. Then I shall be disappointed and forced to answer my own invitations, which may cause harm to several innocent hostesses. A small breath of laughter escaped Verity before she could prevent it. The sound startled her. It seemed to startle the Duke more. His eyes softened by the smallest degree, then returned to restraint before it could become presumption. Verity looked at Mrs. Dacre, who gave the faintest nod. The older woman understood pride. She also understood rent, coal, bread, and the 1,000 ordinary costs hidden beneath the word independence. Then I accept, Verity said. On the condition that the wage is clear and the duties are not invented to spare my feelings. Lady Honoria's smile sharpened with approval. Excellent. We shall get along dangerously well. The matter might have ended there, but the Duke did not move. He drew a folded paper from his coat, then seemed to reconsider and kept it in his hand. Miss Lorne, there is one more question. You need not answer now. Her body knew before her mind did that the room had changed. Yes? Did your father employ a solicitor named Mr. Elias Pemberton of Lincoln's Inn? Verity searched memory. Her father's desk. A black ribbon around documents. Her mother's lowered voice. I believe so. I was young when he died. Have you received correspondence from that office in recent months? No, the answer came at once. Too quickly. A shadow crossed the Duke's face. Lady Honoria became very still. Mrs. Dacre looked from one to the other. Verity's fingers found the empty space where the ivory button had been. Why do you ask? The Duke did not soften the truth with false comfort. Because Mr. Pemberton's clerk delivered several letters addressed to you at Lady Octavia's house. He was told they had been received. The room seemed to narrow round Verity, not with fear alone, but with the first hard outline of understanding. Lady Octavia's panic. Adrian's mention of papers. The locked doors hidden inside polite sentences. Verity lifted her chin, though her heart had begun to beat painfully. Then someone received them for me. Yes, the Duke said. And I think we must learn why. Lord Adrian Vexley chose the wrong morning to arrive at Caldermere House with indignation in his gloves. Verity had been there less than an hour, seated in Lady Honoria Rowe's smaller parlour with a neat stack of correspondence before her, when the footman announced him in a tone so careful that every person in the room understood trouble had entered with the card. Caldermere House stood in Grosvenor Square with the quiet confidence of old power, all pale stone, polished brass, and servants who moved as if noise were a moral failing. Verity had not come to be displayed there. Lady Honoria had brought her from Mrs. Dacre's house after breakfast to discuss the companion's position, make a list of duties, and send for Verity's belongings in a manner that could not be mistaken for begging. The Duke had joined them only long enough to ask whether she would permit a letter to Mr. Elias Pemberton of Lincoln's Inn. She had said yes, because the missing letters now sat in her thoughts like locked doors. Then Lord Adrian arrived. Lady Honoria looked down at his card as if it were a stain on linen. How ambitious of him, she said. He has confused persistence with consequence. Verity's stomach tightened, but she placed the quill back into its stand. Her hands were steady. That mattered. The Duke stood near the mantel, one arm behind his back, his expression unreadable. You do not have to receive him. No, Verity said. But if I do not, he will say I was hidden. Let him say what he likes, Lady Honoria replied. Most people do. Verity almost smiled. He has already spoken for me once. I would rather not make a habit of it. The Duke's gaze settled on her with that grave attention which never felt like flattery. Then he will be received in the library. My aunt will accompany you if you choose to enter. You will not speak with him alone. I would not wish to. His eyes cooled, not at her, but at whatever memory sat behind the need for that answer. Good. Lord Adrian was waiting in the library when they entered, standing before a wall of leather-bound volumes as if learning could be borrowed by proximity. His hat lay on the table, his gloves in one fist. He had dressed carefully, which meant he intended to be believed. Verity entered beside Lady Honoria, with the Duke a pace behind them. That arrangement unsettled Adrian more than if the Duke had taken the room by force. A woman with a chaperone and a witness was harder to dismiss than a wounded girl on a pavement. Verity, Adrian said, softening his voice at once. Thank heaven. I was told you had placed yourself under His Grace's influence, and I feared you were being poorly advised. Lady Honoria sat without invitation and opened her reticule. How touching. Concern often arrives wearing the boots of inconvenience. Adrian ignored her with difficulty. I have come to end this unpleasantness. Then you should not have begun it, Verity said. His mouth tightened. You are angry. I understand that. But a woman in your position must think carefully before turning a private misunderstanding into public disgrace. Private? Verity repeated. There were 8 guests in Lady Octavia's drawing room. Because you forced a scene. I asked for plainness. You asked for assurances no gentleman could properly give under pressure. The old Verity would have searched that sentence for a place to blame herself. This Verity heard only the evasion. Then I am fortunate to have received plainness instead. Adrian's colour rose. He glanced at the Duke. Caldermere, you cannot mean to encourage this. Miss Lorne is connected to Lady Octavia's household. She is not without obligations. Obligations are not chains, the Duke said. Though I understand the distinction may trouble you. Adrian gave a short laugh. You know nothing of the matter. I know what I heard. The room quieted around those words. Verity felt them not as rescue, but as foundation. The Duke did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He simply placed truth where Adrian could not step around it. Adrian turned back to her. Come home, Verity. Apologize to Lady Octavia. Let this absurd employment vanish before anyone important hears of it. Lady Honoria is important, Verity said. Lady Honoria looked pleased. Occasionally. Adrian's impatience sharpened. Do not be clever. It does not suit the gravity of your situation. Verity folded her hands. I have been clever for years when it suited other people. I copied letters, balanced household lists, remembered birthdays, soothed guests, and made myself useful enough to be tolerated. I see no reason to abandon the habit now that it serves me. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Adrian's face. You are being led into ingratitude. No. I am being paid for work I was already doing. Lady Honoria clicked her tongue. A dangerous concept. It may spread. Adrian looked at the Duke again, angrier now. This is beneath you. So was last night, the Duke said. Yet you managed it before witnesses. The words landed with exquisite civility. Adrian's jaw worked once. Miss Lorne, if you persist, society will conclude you left because your expectations were disappointed. I can prevent that. By saying I misunderstood you. By saying you were overwrought. I was not. By saying you were badly advised. I was not. His restraint thinned. By saying you are sorry. I am not. The final answer hung between them. Verity did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every denial felt like a thread cut from the net that had held her. Adrian stepped closer before he caught himself. The Duke did not move, but his silence altered the distance. Adrian stopped. "You think this makes you strong," he said. "It makes you vulnerable. Lady Octavia has protected you more than you understand. Without her name, you will discover how quickly doors close. Some doors," Verity said, "are only useful because one is afraid to leave them." Pretty words. True ones. His eyes narrowed. And what of the papers? There it was. The small slip. The sound of a lock turning in the wrong room. Verity kept her face still. The Duke did too, but Lady Honoria's fan paused in midair. "What papers?" Verity asked. Adrian's expression changed so quickly that anyone less attentive might have missed it. "Nothing that need concern you if you behave reasonably. You came here to discuss my behavior. Now you have mentioned papers. I would like to know which subject brought you. Do not twist my meaning. I am trying to find it." Lady Honoria's fan resumed, slow and sharp. Adrian reached for his hat. "This is pointless while you are in this temper. Lady Octavia will be wounded by your stubbornness. Lady Octavia is welcome to send my belongings. You owe her more than a curt note. I owe her no apology for leaving a room where I was insulted. You owe me the chance to repair matters." Verity looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not regret but inconvenience dressed as injury. He did not miss her. He missed the woman who would have made his life easier by doubting herself. "You had that chance last night," she said. "You used it." Adrian turned toward the Duke with a final flash of resentment. "You are making an enemy over a dependent gentlewoman." The Duke's voice remained level. "No. You are making yourself visible over one." Adrian left with a bow too shallow for courtesy and too careful for open insult. The door closed behind him. Verity remained standing until the sound of his steps faded. Only then did she notice how tightly she had clasped her hands. Lady Honoria rose and touched the back of a chair, not Verity's arm, offering steadiness without presuming upon pain. "Well," she said. "If stupidity were a title, he would outrank us all." A breath escaped Verity, almost laughter, almost grief. The Duke did not smile. His gaze was on the door. He was frightened when he mentioned papers. "Yes," Verity said. "So was Lady Octavia when I said locked door." The Duke looked at her. "You noticed?" "I have spent years surviving by noticing what people hoped I would miss." Something in his expression shifted, not pity, but respect edged with anger. Before he could answer, the footman entered with a silver tray. "A reply from Mr. Pemberton's clerk, Your Grace." The Duke took the folded note, read it once, and his face became very still. Lady Honoria's fan closed. Verity felt the room gather itself around the silence. "What is it?" she asked. The Duke handed her the note instead of summarizing it. That, too, was a kind of respect. The writing was brief. Mr. Pemberton would receive Miss Lorne at her earliest convenience. Several letters had indeed been delivered to Lady Octavia Pell's residence over the past 6 months. The most recent concerned a maternal trust becoming accessible upon Miss Lorne's 25th birthday. Verity read the last line twice. Her birthday had been 3 weeks ago. The paper did not tremble. Her hand did. She looked up and found the Duke watching not the weakness, but the effort it took to master it. "Miss Lorne," he said quietly, "I think Lord Adrian came this morning because someone feared you were about to learn you had choices." Verity read the clerk's note until the words lost shape, then read it once more because her life had altered inside a single sentence and she did not yet trust herself to understand it. A maternal trust. Accessible upon her 25th birthday. Several letters delivered. She had turned 25 3 weeks earlier in Lady Octavia's breakfast room, where a single currant bun had been placed beside her plate and called a celebration because the housekeeper remembered what the family preferred to forget. Lady Octavia had kissed her cheek that morning and said, "My dear, we must be economical with expectations as well as candles." Verity had smiled because she had been trained to accept smallness as prudence. Now the note in her hand made that morning seem less like neglect and more like design. Lady Honoria sent the footman for fresh tea, though no one had touched the old pot. The Duke stood near the library window, his face turned slightly away, as if he were giving Verity the courtesy of not watching the first shock strike. That, too, unsettled her. People had always observed her discomfort when it confirmed their authority. No one had ever looked aside to preserve her pride. A trust, Verity said at last. The word felt too grand for her plain gown, her borrowed room, her coat missing one button. It cannot be much. Enough to require concealment, the Duke said. She looked up. That is not an answer. His mouth tightened by the smallest degree. No. It is a suspicion. Lady Honoria leaned forward. Mr. Pemberton must tell you the particulars himself. Until then, we know only that correspondence addressed to you did not reach you. Lady Octavia received it, Verity said. Or someone in her house did. And Lord Adrian came here this morning to persuade you back before you could ask why. The Duke's voice remained measured, but the quiet made it sharper. Verity folded the note precisely, because if her hands had an occupation, her heart might not show so plainly. He mentioned papers. Yes. He looked afraid when he did. Yes. She almost laughed, though there was no humor in her. It is strange, Your Grace. Yesterday I was apparently too ordinary to matter. This morning I seem to matter very much. The Duke turned from the window then. His gaze met hers fully, and for once the discipline in his expression did not hide the anger beneath it. You mattered yesterday. The words were not tender in the way compliments were tender. They were firmer than that. They sounded like a fact being restored to its proper place. Verity looked down before the warmth of them could become dangerous. Lady Honoria cleared her throat, either out of tact or impatience. We shall proceed sensibly. Miss Lorne, you will remain with me as agreed. Caldermere will write to Mr. Pemberton requesting an appointment, but only with your permission. You will keep copies of every letter sent and received. You will not answer Lady Octavia except through my house for the present. And you will eat something before noon, because revelations are exhausting and society offers very poor refreshments when it is busy ruining people. Verity nodded, though her thoughts had already gone backward through the years. Lady Octavia asking her to copy invitations because her hand was so neat. Lady Octavia standing over her shoulder while she addressed envelopes. Lady Octavia saying that a young woman without fortune must be grateful for protection, since the world was not kind to inconvenient girls. Verity had believed poverty was a fact like rain. One endured it. One adjusted one's hem and carried on. But if the poverty had been arranged, if dependence had been fed to her spoon by spoon until she forgot the taste of choice, then grief was not enough. She felt something else rising beneath it. Not rage. Rage was too loud. This was cleaner. This had a blade. May I ask something improper, she said. Lady Honoria's brows lifted. At my age, one welcomes variety. Verity turned to the Duke. Why do you care? Lady Honoria stilled. The Duke did not answer at once. A coal shifted in the grate. Outside, carriage wheels passed over the square with a wet, steady rhythm. Because I heard a man attempt to make cruelty sound reasonable, he said. Because I watched a woman leave a room with more dignity than anyone who remained in it. Because I have influence, and influence is a poor thing if it is only used to make life easier for oneself. Verity tried to find suspicion in the answer. She found restraint instead. That is a very ducal reply. It is also true. Those are not always the same thing. For a moment, his expression almost changed. Not a smile. Something nearer to approval. No. They are not. Lady Honoria reached into the small workbag beside her chair and produced a wrapped object. My nephew asked whether this might be returned to you. Verity knew before the paper opened. The ivory button lay in Lady Honoria's palm, cleaned of damp, threaded loosely with a length of grey silk. The sight of it pierced her more sharply than the solicitor's note. It was foolish. It was a button. Yet her mother's hands had once held it, her mother's voice once murmuring that one must mend what one could and release what one must. Verity took it carefully. Thank you. The Duke's gaze lowered to the button, then away. A seamstress from my aunt's household can mend it properly, if you wish. No, Verity said, too quickly. She softened her voice. Forgive me. I would like to do it myself. Of course. She held the button in her fist and remembered her mother on a rainy afternoon, thin from illness but still precise with a needle. Never let them make you grateful for your own bread, her mother had said, fastening that very coat around Verity's shoulders. At 17, Verity had thought it only a warning against pride. Now she wondered whether her mother had seen the world more clearly than anyone had told her. The next note arrived before the hour ended. This one came from Lady Octavia, not folded with anger as the first had been, but written in a gentler hand meant to be shown to others. Lady Honoria allowed Verity to open it herself. My dear Verity, since you have chosen to remain away from my roof for the present, I must still think of your reputation. Lady Thornfield's charity musicale is tomorrow afternoon at Hanover Square. Your attendance will demonstrate that no breach exists between us. Absence will invite painful interpretations. I trust you will not add stubbornness to last night's confusion. Verity read it twice. The trap was beautifully laid. If she stayed away, Lady Octavia would say shame kept her hidden. If she went, the room would measure her dress, her face, her solitude, and every whispered version of the story Adrian preferred. Lady Honoria took the note and made a small sound of contempt. She wishes to display you before you have learned enough to defend yourself. Yes, Verity said. The Duke's answer came at once. You need not go. Verity looked at him. There it was again. Protection offered quickly, almost before the danger had finished naming itself. This time, she understood both the kindness and the risk. If I do not go, she will have the room without me. If you go, she will try to wound you in it. She has already tried to wound me from outside it. Lady Honoria watched her with growing interest. And what do you wish, Miss Lorne? The question settled into the room. Verity opened her hand. The ivory button rested against her palm, small and pale, a quiet proof that something torn could be repaired by the same hand that owned it. She thought of Lady Octavia's locked drawer. She thought of Adrian's frightened mention of papers. She thought of the drawing room she had left and the hundreds of eyes society seemed to grow whenever a woman stumbled. I wish to go, she said. The Duke's face grew still. Why? Because Lady Octavia has spent years teaching me to be useful in rooms where no one noticed me. Tomorrow, I shall be useful to myself. Lady Honoria's smile came slowly. Excellent. I shall wear purple. It alarms hypocrites. The Duke did not smile. His concern remained, but this time he did not turn it into command. Then you will not go alone. No, Verity said. I will go with Lady Honoria, as her companion. She met his eyes. Not as your cause. He accepted the correction with a slight bow of the head. As you choose. The words should not have moved her. They were simple. Yet after a life arranged by other people's convenience, choice sounded almost like music. That evening, in the small chamber Lady Honoria had given her, Verity sat beside the lamp and sewed the ivory button back onto the grey coat with deliberate, even stitches. She did not know what awaited her in Hanover Square. She knew only that Lady Octavia had hidden letters, Adrian had feared papers, and the Duke of Caldermere had looked at her as if her decision mattered. When the final knot was tied, Verity held the coat up to the light. It was still plain. Still worn. Still hers. For the first time in years, that felt like enough to begin with. The first whisper reached Verity before she had crossed Lady Thornfield's threshold, which meant Lady Octavia had been busy. Hanover Square wore the polished brightness of a respectable afternoon, all brass knockers, swept steps, and carriages waiting in a dignified line beneath a pale London sky. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax, hyacinths, and warm paper, the particular scent of charity performed by women who understood that benevolence could be as competitive as a ball. Verity entered beside Lady Honoria Rowe, wearing her plain dark gown, her grey coat brushed clean over one arm, and the mended ivory button fastened with stitches only she could see. She had expected looks. She had prepared for them. Still, expectation did not blunt the first cut of being measured by a dozen pairs of eyes and found entertaining. Near the mantel, Mrs. Bullant leaned toward a baroness and murmured, not softly enough, "That is Miss Lorne." The one who left Lord Adrian's party in such a state. Another voice answered, "Poor Lady Octavia. These dependent girls can be so excitable when gentlemen are kind." Verity kept walking. A week earlier, such words would have made her search herself for fault. Now they passed over her like cold rain on wool. Unpleasant, but not fatal. Lady Honoria's hand rested lightly on her cane. "Do you hear them, my dear?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. It is always useful to know where the snakes are before one sits down." Verity's mouth nearly betrayed a smile, but Lady Octavia appeared at once, gliding forward in lavender silk with a face arranged for wounded forgiveness. She took both of Verity's hands before Verity could prevent it without causing the very scene Lady Octavia desired. "My dear child," Lady Octavia said, her voice trembling just enough for witnesses. "How relieved I am to see you sensible again. Good afternoon, Lady Octavia." Verity withdrew her hands gently. "Lady Honoria was kind enough to bring me in her carriage." "Yes, I see that." Lady Octavia's gaze flicked to Lady Honoria, then to the coat over Verity's arm, where the ivory button held in its place. Something small and sharp crossed her expression. It vanished almost at once. "We were all so anxious. You cannot imagine how distressing it is when a young woman chooses impulse over guidance." "I begin to understand how distress travels," Verity said. "It seems to arrive before the person concerned." Lady Honoria coughed into her glove. Lady Octavia's smile tightened. "Still spirited. We must hope that proves useful rather than unfortunate. Lady Thornfield has been waiting for assistance with the subscription lists. You always had a neat hand." There it was. The old summons wrapped as praise. Verity looked toward the long table near the windows, where ledgers, calling cards, donation slips, and folded letters lay in elegant confusion. Several ladies stood around them, discussing accounts with the helpless energy of people accustomed to servants making order after they created disorder. "I shall be glad to assist," Verity said. She did not say that she had balanced Lady Octavia's household charity accounts for 4 years without acknowledgement. She did not need to. Competence had a way of speaking once given room. Lady Thornfield, a tall widow with diamonds at her throat and spectacles on a chain, greeted her with kind uncertainty. "Miss Lorne, if you would not mind copying the confirmed subscriptions onto the fare sheet, I should be grateful. The figures have become rather confused." "May I see the rough ledger as well?" Verity asked. "The fare sheet will be more accurate if I compare both." One of the younger ladies gave a little laugh. "How serious?" Verity looked at the page. Money usually prefers seriousness. Lady Thornfield blinked, then handed her the ledger. For the next several minutes, the room tried to forget her and failed. That was new. Verity took her seat, sharpened a pencil, and began arranging the slips by amount, then by donor. 10 guineas from Lady Morpeth. 5 from Mrs. Ballant, though she had announced 10. 12 from the Duke of Caldermere, entered twice by mistake, once under Caldermere and once under Rowe. Verity drew a careful line through the duplicate and noted it in the margin. She felt women watching her hands, perhaps waiting for them to shake. They did not. Lady Octavia stood behind her shoulder for a time, breathing in that controlled way she used when servants displeased her. "You need not trouble yourself over the older pages," she said. Lady Thornfield asked for the fare sheet. "The older pages explain why the fare sheet is wrong." "So exacting," Mrs. Ballant said. "One would think you had been born to accounts." "No," Verity replied, without looking up. "Only required to understand them." A slight silence followed. It was not a victory, but it was space. She used it. A quarter hour passed. Tea cooled. Fans lifted and lowered. Lady Honoria sat near the fire like a benevolent judge, speaking when necessary and seeing everything. Verity found 2 added columns, 1 missing receipt, and a pledge attributed to a woman who had been in Bath for the past month. Then her pencil stopped. Her own name stood halfway down a page from the previous week. Miss Verity Lorne, £1.10. Received by hand. Her breath caught so quietly that no one heard. She stared at the signature beside it. Verity Lorne. It was close. Too close for accident. The long V had been copied well, and the final E had her small upward lift. But the L in Lorne was wrong. Verity had always formed it with a narrow lower loop because her father had taught her to keep capital letters modest. This L opened wide, like Lady Octavia's. A sound moved in the room, a shifting of silk and interest. Lady Octavia had noticed her stillness. "Is something amiss?" she asked. Verity placed her pencil down. If she spoke too quickly, she would reveal alarm. If she said nothing, the evidence might vanish. She touched the ledger with one finger. "This entry is irregular." Lady Thornfield came closer. "Which entry?" "Mine." The word travelled. She felt it reach the women behind her and change shape in their minds. Mine could mean confession. Mine could mean scandal. Verity kept her voice calm. "It records a donation I did not make." Mrs. Balancefan stopped. "How curious." Lady Octavia leaned over the page. "My dear, perhaps you have forgotten. Small sums given in a busy house are easily overlooked." "Not by me." The answer was immediate. Too immediate for Lady Octavia's comfort. "Verity," she said softly, in the old warning tone, "do not create a difficulty over a clerical error. A clerical error does not usually imitate a signature." Lady Thornfield's expression sharpened. She took the ledger and angled it toward the light. At that exact moment, the door opened and the Duke of Caldermere was announced. The room changed as if someone had drawn a curtain away from a flame. Men did not often attend the working hour of ladies' committees unless patronage required a formal appearance, and dukes did not arrive without consequence. Alistair Rowe entered in dark morning dress, bowed to Lady Thornfield, then to Lady Honoria, and finally allowed his gaze to find Verity. He did not look surprised to see her seated at the table. He looked, almost imperceptibly, as if he had expected her to be where the work was. Lady Thornfield recovered first. "Your Grace, how generous of you to call. We were just uncovering the full disorder of our little accounts." "Then I am fortunate to arrive after the danger has been identified," he said. Lady Octavia gave a light laugh. "Nothing dangerous, surely. Miss Lorne has discovered a minor copying mistake and made it sound like a matter for Parliament." The Duke looked at the ledger in Lady Thornfield's hand, then at Verity. "Miss Lorne?" The room waited for him to speak for her. He did not. Verity felt the weight of that restraint, and with it, an unexpected steadiness. "There is an entry in my name," she said. "It records a donation I did not make and bears a signature similar to mine, but not written by me." "How can you be certain?" Mrs. Ballant asked, with the appetite of a woman scenting scandal. Verity took a blank slip from the table. "Because I know my own hand." She wrote her name once, slowly, then placed it beside the ledger. The difference was small but visible. Lady Thornfield bent over both pages. "The L," she said. Verity nodded. "Yes." The Duke stepped closer, still leaving space between them and the table. "You observed that at once." "I was taught to notice small differences, Your Grace." "By whom?" "By people who preferred I correct errors before they became visible." Something in his eyes cooled, but his voice remained even. "Then today visibility has served a better purpose." Lady Octavia's fingers tightened around her reticule. Verity saw it. The Duke saw Verity seeing it. No one else seemed to understand how much passed in that single instant. Lady Thornfield closed the ledger with more firmness than before. "We shall keep this page aside until it can be compared properly. Miss Lorne, I am obliged to you." "Obliged?" The word struck Verity with quiet force. In Lady Octavia's house, people had been inconvenienced by her usefulness. Here, at least for a breath, it had been named. "I am glad to help," she said. "Indeed," Lady Octavia replied, recovering her smile. "Verity has always been most helpful with other people's papers." It sounded affectionate. It was not. The Duke's gaze moved to Lady Octavia, and the temperature of the room seemed to fall by several degrees. "That," he said, "may prove worth remembering." Lady Octavia paled just enough. Verity lowered her eyes to the ledger, but not before she saw the fear return. It was brief, polished over almost immediately, yet unmistakable. Lady Octavia had not expected her to find the signature. Worse, she had not expected anyone powerful to care that she had. The meeting resumed, but differently. Women who had whispered now asked Verity where figures belonged. Lady Thornfield requested her opinion twice. Even Mrs. Bolland watched her with less pity and more caution. By the time the last list was sorted, Verity understood that society had not embraced her. Not nearly. But the room had been forced to adjust its story. She was no longer merely the poor relation who had fled a gentleman's insult. She was the woman who had found an error no one else had seen. Near the door, as Lady Honoria called for her carriage, the Duke paused beside Verity without touching her or lowering his voice beyond propriety. "You were right to come." She looked at the closed ledger in Lady Thornfield's hands. "I am not certain yet whether that comforts me. Truth seldom comforts at first." "What does it do?" His gaze rested briefly on Lady Octavia, who was speaking too brightly to Mrs. Bolland. "It gives people less room to lie." Verity's fingers brushed the mended button at her coat. For the first time since leaving Mayfair, she felt not safe, exactly, but armed. Lady Octavia turned then and smiled at her from across the room, the kind of smile one offered a child near a steep stair. Verity smiled back with perfect politeness. The older woman's expression faltered. She had begun the afternoon believing Verity could be managed in public. She ended it knowing Verity could read what had been written in her name. By the time the first notes of the pianoforte trembled through Lady Thornfield's drawing-room the following afternoon, Verity understood that the musicale had not been arranged to raise money. It had been arranged to raise witnesses. Hanover Square shone beneath a thin wash of afternoon light, and Lady Thornfield's rooms glittered with all the soft weapons society preferred. There were gilt chairs placed in conversational traps, vases of hothouse flowers too fragrant to ignore, silver trays passing between guests who smiled with their mouths and judged with everything else. Verity stood beside Lady Honoria near the second row of chairs, her grey coat folded over her arm because the day had turned damp and because she refused to hide the garment as though poverty were a stain. She had mended the ivory button herself the night before. The stitches were small, even, and hers. That mattered more than any compliment could have. Across the room, Lady Octavia Pell moved from group to group in pale blue silk, gracious, wounded, and watchful. Lord Adrian Vexley stood near the mantel with two gentlemen and a lady in rose satin, speaking in that lazy tone he used when he wished cruelty to pass for amusement. He had not approached Verity. He did not need to. His glances had already done their work. A lady behind Verity whispered, "How brave of Lady Octavia to receive her after such embarrassment." Another replied, "Or how strategic. One must manage dependents carefully." Verity let the words pass. Her pulse remained steady, but she was aware of the Duke of Caldermere near the far wall, speaking with Lady Thornfield in low tones. He had not come to her at once. He had not placed himself at her side like a banner of possession. Yet whenever a voice sharpened too near her, his attention shifted with quiet precision. It was strange to be protected without being crowded. It was stranger to discover how easily she could breathe because of it. Lady Honoria leaned close and said, "If anyone asks whether you play, say no. It saves you from being offered bad music and worse conversation." Verity almost smiled. "I shall remember." The program began with a young woman singing an Italian air while half the room pretended to understand the words. Verity listened politely, but her gaze kept returning to the subscription table, where the ledger from the day before lay closed beneath a paperweight. Lady Thornfield had kept it aside as promised. Lady Octavia had noticed that too. Her smile had not reached her eyes since. After the song ended, guests rose for tea and compliments. The room loosened. That was when Lady Octavia struck. She did it beautifully. She waited until Lady Thornfield thanked everyone for supporting the charity, until conversation had gathered around generosity and moral feeling. Then she sighed, just softly enough that Mrs. Bolland heard. "We must be grateful for warmth and shelter," Lady Octavia said. "Some poor creatures have nothing but what they carry on their backs. I confess, after the distress of the other night, the sight of Verity leaving with only that shabby grey coat nearly broke my heart." The word shabby travelled faster than the music had. Verity felt the room turn. Not all at once. That would have been vulgar. But fans lowered. Cups paused. Eyes moved to the coat over her arm. Adrian gave a low laugh. Miss Lorne has always possessed a gift for appearing more unfortunate than she is. Verity looked at him. Has she? His smile flickered. He had expected embarrassment, not inquiry. Lady Octavia placed a hand to her breast. My dear, no one faults you for sentiment. A girl without means grows attached to small things. The kindness in her voice made the insult worse. Verity's fingers closed over the wool. Before she could answer, a young maid appeared at the side door carrying another grey coat. For 1 second, Verity thought the room had doubled. Then she understood. The maid held her old coat, the one she had left at Pell House in haste after changing during a rainy morning weeks before. It was nearly identical to the one on Verity's arm, but older, thinner at the elbows, and unmistakably private. The maid's face was pale. She kept her eyes down. Beg pardon, my lady, she whispered. Lady Octavia turned with a small, theatrical start. Mary? What is this? The maid swallowed. The coat. You said Miss Lorne had forgotten it, and it was to be returned. Silence opened. It was not the complete stillness of the night Verity left Mayfair. This was sharper, hungrier. Lady Octavia gave a delicate, helpless laugh. How awkward. I did not mean for it to be brought in here. That was a lie so polished that several people admired it before they believed it. Adrian reached for the coat from the maid and held it up between 2 fingers, as though kindness required distance. Another one. Miss Lorne, you have been maintaining quite a wardrobe of tragedy. A few guests laughed. Briefly. Verity felt heat rise under her skin, then fade into something colder. She looked at the maid, not at Adrian. Mary was trembling. Not from guilt. From fear of having obeyed the wrong person in front of the right witnesses. The Duke moved then. Only a step, but the room felt it. His voice cut through the murmurs without rising. Who instructed a servant to carry a lady's private garment into a drawing room? No one laughed after that. Adrian lowered the coat. Lady Octavia's expression hardened for 1 instant before softening again. Your Grace, it is only a misunderstanding. Mary is young. Then she should not bear the burden of an older person's intention. The maid's eyes filled, though she did not cry. Verity understood the mercy in that sentence. It spared Mary without sparing the person who had used her. Lady Thornfield, whose pride in her rooms had begun to war with her dislike of scandal, stepped forward. Mary, you may place the coat on that chair and go. No, Verity said. Her voice was quiet, but it stopped the maid before she moved. Every face turned back to her. Verity crossed the few feet between them and took the coat from Mary's hands. Thank you. You did as you were told. The maid looked up for the first time, startled by forgiveness. Yes, miss. That is all. Mary fled softly, if such a thing could be done. Verity held the coat. It smelled faintly of cedar and the Pell House laundry soap. The fabric was worn, the lining smooth beneath her thumb. She could feel the eyes on her. She could feel Adrian waiting for her to flush, Lady Octavia waiting for her to deny, the room waiting for the poor relation to become either pitiful or rude. She chose neither. This coat is mine, Verity said. It has kept me warm in weather that did not ask whether I could afford better. Lady Honoria's cane struck the floor once. Not loudly. Enough. Verity turned the coat in her hands. A dark thread near the inner seam caught her eye. Her breath paused. The lining had been cut, then sewn back with quick, uneven stitches. Not hers. Not her mother's. The seam was 2 inches long, hidden beneath the left side where a folded letter might have rested flat. She touched it lightly. The room sharpened again, but now it sharpened around something no one had expected her to see. Lady Octavia's gaze dropped to Verity's hand. Fear flashed there. Gone at once. But Verity saw it. The Duke saw Verity seeing it. He came no closer. Miss Lorne, he said, and the question beneath her name was clear. Do you want me to end this? Verity looked at him. The answer formed before fear could smother it. No, Your Grace. Not yet. His eyes held hers. Then I shall stand where I am. The words moved through her like warmth, restrained and exact. He would not seize her battle. He would not abandon her to it either. Verity turned back to Lady Octavia. How kind of you to return this. Lady Octavia's smile was careful. Of course, my dear. And how curious, Verity added, that someone searched the lining before doing so. Mrs. Ballant inhaled. Adrian's expression changed from amusement to alarm. Lady Thornfield took a step forward. Searched. Verity lifted the seam for them to see. The stitches were plain now, darker than the original thread, hurried where her mother's work had once been neat. This coat was not torn when I left it at Pell House. Lady Octavia's voice grew soft. Verity, grief and agitation can distort memory. So can guilt, Lady Honoria said. The room held its breath. Verity slipped 2 fingers carefully into the loosened seam. At first there was nothing. Then her fingertips brushed a scrap of paper lodged between lining and wool. She drew it out slowly. It was small, torn from the corner of a folded sheet, but the ink remained legible enough. Elias Pemberton, Lincoln's Inn. Her heart struck once, hard. The solicitor. The letters. The locked drawer she had never seen but now could almost imagine. Adrian whispered something under his breath. Lady Octavia went white. The Duke's face became very still. Verity held the scrap between her fingers and understood that the humiliation had failed in the very moment it became evidence. She looked at the room that had gathered to see her ashamed. It appears, she said, her voice steady, that my poor coat has been more useful than anyone intended. The silence that followed did not belong to Lady Octavia. It belonged to Verity. For the first time, she let herself keep it. The scrap of paper changed the room more completely than a shout could have done. A moment earlier, Lady Thornfield's drawing room had been full of people deciding whether Verity Lorne deserved pity or contempt. Now every gaze had fixed upon the little torn corner between her fingers, where the name of Mr. Elias Pemberton of Lincoln's Inn sat like a quiet accusation. Lady Octavia recovered first because she had spent a lifetime recovering before anyone could name what she had done. My dear child, she said, and the tenderness in her voice was almost perfect. How extraordinary. You must let me see that. It may have come from any old household paper. Verity folded her hand around the scrap. Then it can remain extraordinary in my possession. Adrian's jaw tightened. The Duke of Caldermere moved at last, not toward Verity, but toward Lady Thornfield. I suggest the coat be regarded as Miss Lorne's property and not handled further without her consent. Lady Thornfield, who valued order nearly as much as reputation, nodded at once. Certainly. Miss Lorne, you may keep it with you. The victory was small and enormous. Verity gathered the coat carefully over her arm. She could feel the uneven seam against her wrist, a rough hidden place where someone had searched for truth before she knew truth was missing. Lady Octavia's eyes followed the movement. This has become needlessly dramatic, she said, smiling toward the guests. A scrap in a lining, a mistaken servant, a poor girl's nerves. We must not allow imagination to outrun charity. Lady Honoria's cane tapped once. Charity has been outrun by evidence, which is much fitter. A few ladies looked down. Mrs. Ballant looked delighted and alarmed in equal measure. Adrian stepped closer to Verity, though the Duke's attention made him stop before he came too near. You would be wise to consider what you imply, he said. Would I? Verity asked. You have been sheltered too long to understand consequence. That is an odd warning from a gentleman who thought me too insignificant to require caution. His face flushed, but before he could answer, the Duke spoke with a measured chill that made even crowded rooms feel formal. Miss Lorne has endured enough public advice for one afternoon. Lady Octavia curtsied slightly to Lady Thornfield. Then I shall withdraw before this unfortunate confusion becomes the only memory of your excellent musicale. It was a graceful retreat, and Verity understood the danger of it. Lady Octavia would turn departure into dignity and dignity into innocence before the next tray of tea crossed the room. Adrian bowed stiffly and followed her. At the doorway, he glanced back at Verity with something colder than anger. It was calculation stripped of charm. The look told her that whatever had been hidden in letters and ledgers would not remain merely hidden. It would be used. Only after they left did the room breathe again. Lady Thornfield approached Verity with the ledger held against her side. "Miss Lorne, I regret the impropriety. I had no knowledge that your garment would be produced." "I believe you, my lady. You showed admirable composure." Verity wanted to laugh at the strange poverty of praise. Admirable composure meant she had not broken in the shape society expected. "Thank you." The Duke's voice came from beside the window. "My carriage is at your disposal, Lady Honoria." Lady Honoria looked at him with narrowed eyes. "How generous of you to offer what you were already going to insist upon." "Aunt." "Do not aunt me in that tone. It has never worked." Verity felt the first edge of exhaustion then. Her hands ached from holding herself still. The scrap of paper seemed to burn through her glove. She allowed Lady Honoria to guide her out, but as they crossed the hall, she felt the Duke near them, silent and contained, like a locked door holding back weather. Outside, the afternoon had turned damp. Carriage wheels hissed along Hanover Square. Only when they were inside Lady Honoria's carriage, with the maid seated opposite and the Duke riding separately beside the coachman for propriety, did Verity let her shoulders fall. Lady Honoria studied her for one block, then said, "You did well. I found a torn corner of paper in a coat lining and accused no one. That is a modest triumph." "No. You refuse to be ashamed of what they used against you. That is rarer than triumph." Verity looked at the coat in her lap. "Someone cut it open." "Yes." "Someone believed something was hidden there." "Yes." "And Lady Octavia knew." Lady Honoria's mouth hardened. "Almost certainly." The carriage turned toward Caldermere House. Verity did not object at first. The Duke's house was not Lady Honoria's residence, but it held the library, the letters, and perhaps some immediate answer. Yet when they arrived, the Duke was waiting on the pavement with his face set in a severity that made every servant move faster. He handed Lady Honoria down, then Verity, touching neither more than courtesy, aloud. "We must speak," he said. The words were calm. The urgency beneath them was not. In the smaller parlour, with Lady Honoria seated like a guardian lion near the hearth, the Duke placed the scrap of paper on a silver tray so no one could claim it had been pocketed carelessly. Then he turned to Verity. "You should leave London for a time." The sentence landed too hard. Verity looked up. "Leave? Elderwick Park is quiet. My aunt can accompany you. Mr. Pemberton can send documents there. Lady Octavia and Vexley cannot reach you through drawing rooms if you are not in them." Lady Honoria's eyes flicked toward him, sharp with warning, but he continued. "The season feeds upon spectacle. Today gave it more than enough. If you remain, they will invent what they cannot prove." Verity heard the care. She heard the command beneath it too. The room seemed suddenly smaller. "Your Grace, I did not leave one house because my movements were managed in order to enter another where they are arranged more elegantly." He went still. "That is not what I intend." "I believe you." That made his expression tighten more than refusal might have done. "Then why resist what is plainly safer?" "Because safety is not the only measure of freedom." Lady Honoria said nothing. The Duke looked toward the window, then back again. "There is another way to protect you." Verity's heart beat once, slow and heavy. She knew what he meant before he shaped the words. The world they inhabited offered few shields to a woman and named most of them after men. "No," she said softly. His jaw set. "You do not know what I was going to say." "Yes, I do." He looked almost angry then, though not with her alone. A formal offer of protection through marriage would silence certain accusations at once. It would replace them with others. Fewer dangerous ones. Not fewer. Different. He drew breath, controlled it, and spoke more carefully. "I would not ask anything of you that you did not freely grant. But I would be accepting under threat. Under necessity. That is not the same as choice." The word struck him. Verity saw it. She also saw the instant he understood, and the understanding hurt him because it came too late to keep him from having wounded her. "Miss Lorne," he said, quieter now, "I spoke from concern, not possession." "I know." Her voice softened because truth deserved fairness, even painful truth. "That is why I am answering concern rather than fleeing possession. But if I accept a husband because Lord Adrian and Lady Octavia have made London cruel, then they will still have written the terms of my life." The Duke did not answer. His face had gone remote, but his eyes had not. They held regret with restraint around it. Lady Honoria finally spoke. "There. Now that both of you have discovered the difference between rescue and command, perhaps we may proceed with sense." Verity looked down at the coat. The missing seam, the restored button, the hidden scrap. "I will not hide," she said. "Not in London. Not at Elderwick Park. Not behind your name." The Duke bowed his head once. It was not defeat. It was acknowledgement. "Then we remain." "I remain," Verity corrected gently. "You may stand beside me, if you still wish it." Something moved across his expression, not warmth exactly, but something warmed by pain. "I do." Before the silence could deepen, a footman entered with a note for Lady Honoria. She broke the seal, read, and lost every trace of humour. "From Mrs. Dacre," she said. "A rumour is already spreading. Lord Adrian is saying Miss Lorne left his party after he discovered she had taken money from him." Verity felt the room tilt, then right itself because she refused to go with it. The Duke's voice became very soft. "That is false." "Of course it is," Lady Honoria said. "But he claims to possess proof." Verity closed her fingers over the torn scrap from Mr. Pemberton's letter. For one moment, the shame they meant to make for her stood outside the window like a storm waiting to be admitted. Then she lifted her chin. "Then we shall have to find the truth before he displays his lie." By noon the next day, Verity had 3 versions of her own disgrace laid out before her, and none of them belonged to her. One said she had fled Lord Adrian Vexley because he had discovered a debt. Another said she had attached herself to the Duke of Caldermere with indecent haste. The third, whispered by a footman who had heard it from a kitchen maid who had heard it from a visiting lady's coachman, said Lady Octavia Pell was heartbroken by the ingratitude of a girl she had raised like a daughter. Verity listened to each report in Lady Honoria's morning room with her hands folded over the grey coat in her lap. The torn scrap from Mr. Pemberton's letter lay on the writing desk beside the charity ledger, weighted by Lady Honoria's silver paper knife. It was remarkable how much damage could be done by paper. A note. A rumour. A forged line in a ledger. A letter kept from its owner. Lady Honoria sat opposite with spectacles low on her nose, sorting subscription slips into little piles with the merciless patience of a woman who had outlived most forms of nonsense. "We have 3 problems," she said. "Only 3?" Verity asked. "Do not become ambitious, my dear. 3 is quite sufficient before luncheon." The Duke stood near the window, silent and severe. Since the previous afternoon, he had been careful with his words. Too careful. Verity knew he regretted offering safety as if safety could be packed into a carriage and delivered to the country. She did not wish to punish him for it. She also did not wish to make it easy for him to forget. "The first problem," Lady Honoria continued, "is the forged entry in Lady Thornfield's ledger. The second is the missing correspondence from Mr. Pemberton. The third is Lord Adrian's claim that he possesses proof of money taken." Verity looked at the forged signature again. Her own name stared back, almost familiar enough to feel like a mirror with the wrong face inside it. "The L is wrong," she said. "You noticed that yesterday," the Duke said. "There is more." She reached for a blank sheet and wrote her name slowly. Verity Lorne. Then she wrote it again, not as herself, but as Lady Octavia had taught her to copy invitations years before, with wider loops and a grander turn at the capital. The second version came frighteningly close to the forged one. The room changed around the page. Lady Honoria leaned forward. The Duke left the window. "I used to copy her correspondence," Verity said. "Not only invitations. Letters of thanks, notes of refusal, household acknowledgements. She would stand beside me and say my hand was too plain for certain recipients. She taught me to widen the capitals. The Duke's face hardened. She taught you to become useful to her hand. Yes. The admission should have shamed her. Instead, it cleared the air. At the time, I thought it was another lesson in being acceptable. I did not understand that a hand may be trained until it can be borrowed. Lady Honoria's mouth thinned. Borrowed is too generous a word. Verity picked up another slip, one of the charity receipts. This signature is not mine, but it is not wholly strange either. Whoever wrote it knew how Lady Octavia preferred my hand to look. Or Lady Octavia wrote it herself, the Duke said. Verity looked at him. Perhaps. But if I accuse her without proof, she becomes the injured aunt again. Then we get proof. The words came too quickly, too much like command. He heard it as soon as she did. His jaw set, and for a brief second the Duke of Caldermere looked less like a man accustomed to obedience and more like one learning the cost of it. "Forgive me," he said. "That was not mine to decide." Lady Honoria made no sound, though her spectacles flashed with approval. Verity felt the apology settle where the previous day's wound had been. It did not erase it. It made room beside it. "We get proof," she said. "But I ask the questions." "Yes. You may arrange the carriage and make sure the room cannot close around me." "Yes. You may not answer for me unless I ask." His gaze met hers. "I understand." She believed him. Not because he said it beautifully, but because saying it seemed to cost him something he was willing to pay. Within the hour, Lady Honoria's carriage carried them to Lincoln's Inn, with Mrs. Hobbs seated opposite Verity and the Duke riding separately behind them to preserve the shape of propriety. London had turned grey and damp, the sort of afternoon that made every stone look older. Verity watched clerks hurry beneath umbrellas and barristers vanish through archways with bundles tied in red tape. The law, she thought, had many doors. Women like her were often expected to wait outside them until a man emerged to explain what had been decided. Not today. Mr. Elias Pemberton received her in a sober chamber that smelled of ink, dust, and old leather. He was a thin gentleman with white whiskers, cautious eyes, and the air of a man who had seen families behave badly enough to stop being surprised. He bowed to Lady Honoria, then to Verity, then to the Duke with proper respect, but he addressed his first question to her. "Miss Lorne, may I say I am relieved to see you at last." At last. The words pressed against her ribs. "You wrote to me several times." "I did." "And you received replies?" Mr. Pemberton hesitated. "I received assurances from Lady Octavia Pell that you were indisposed, then travelling, then content to allow her to manage preliminary matters until a suitable family arrangement was concluded." Lady Honoria inhaled sharply. The Duke remained still. Verity forced herself not to look at him. "What family arrangement?" Mr. Pemberton opened a file and drew out a folded draft. "A proposed marriage settlement prepared for discussion. It named Lord Adrian Vexley as prospective husband and made provision for your maternal trust to be placed under management after marriage, with certain allowances granted to you." Verity heard the words with perfect clarity. They did not shock her at once. They arranged themselves like furniture in a room she had never chosen. Adrian's attention. Lady Octavia's pressure. The letters hidden. The papers he had mentioned in the library. Her 25th birthday passing under a currant bun and a lie. "Who requested the draft?" she asked. Mr. Pemberton looked uncomfortable. "Lady Octavia wrote that you wished the matter prepared discreetly." "Did she include any letter from me?" "A note in a hand resembling yours." Verity held out her hand. "May I see it?" The solicitor glanced at the Duke, then seemed to remember himself and gave the paper to Verity. The Duke did not move. "Good." The note was brief. It stated that Miss Verity Lorne trusted Lady Octavia to guide the settlement and wished Lord Adrian's interests to be considered kindly. The signature was close, but the L opened wide, too wide, a borrowed imitation dressed as consent. Verity laid her own writing beside it. Mr. Pemberton's face changed. "I see. I did not write this," Verity said. Her voice was calm. "I did not authorize Lady Octavia to receive my letters. I did not agree to a settlement with Lord Adrian." I did not ask for my property to be managed by any future husband. Saying each sentence aloud seemed to return a piece of herself. Mr. Pemberton rose. Then the trustees must be informed immediately. No final instrument has been executed. Nothing has passed beyond draft. Relief came so fast it nearly weakened her knees. She remained standing. And the trust? It is modest by great family standards, but not insignificant. Properly managed, it would provide you independence. Independence. The word entered the room quietly and altered everything. The Duke's eyes found hers, but he said nothing. Verity was grateful for the silence. She wanted to meet that word alone first. I want copies, she said. Of every letter sent, every reply received, every draft prepared, and every note bearing my name. Mr. Pemberton bowed. You shall have them. And I want future correspondence delivered to Lady Honoria Rowe's residence until I direct otherwise. Certainly. Lady Honoria smiled with dangerous sweetness. How efficient we have become now that the person concerned has been allowed into the room. Mr. Pemberton looked as though he deserved the rebuke and accepted it. When they emerged into the courtyard, the damp air felt cleaner than it had before. Verity held the copies tied in ribbon against her chest, not as comfort, but as evidence. The Duke walked beside her at a careful distance. I owe you another apology, he said. For what? For thinking first of removing you from danger instead of asking how you wished to meet it. Verity looked ahead, where Lady Honoria's carriage waited beneath the arch. I was angry. You had cause. I am still angry. You still have cause. That almost made her smile. Almost. I do not know what I shall do next. You do not have to know this minute. But I know what I will not do. I will not let Lady Octavia tell society I am confused. I will not let Lord Adrian display a lie as proof. And I will not be grateful for an independence that was already mine. The Duke stopped beside the carriage step and bowed his head, not as a patron to a dependent, but as a man acknowledging a decision. Then I will stand beside you and keep the room quiet enough for them to hear it. Verity looked at him then. The rain had darkened the shoulders of his coat. His expression remained restrained, but there was something unguarded in the promise because he had learned to make it smaller than command and stronger than pity. Thank you, she said. Before he could answer, Mrs. Hobb opened the carriage door with a worried glance. My lady, a note arrived while we waited. Lady Honoria took it, read, and handed it to Verity without softening the blow. Lady Octavia had already begun her counterstroke. The note said that Miss Lorne's improper attachment to the Duke of Caldermere had led her to make wild accusations against the family who sheltered her. By evening, the sentence would be in every room that mattered. Verity folded the note once. Her hands did not tremble. Good, she said. Lady Honoria stared. Good? Verity stepped into the carriage with the solicitor's copies held firmly in her lap. Now they have chosen their lie. We can prepare the truth to meet it. By evening, London had done what London always did best. It had taken a lie, dressed it for dinner, and sent it calling in 3 directions at once. The first version reached Lady Honoria Rowe's house before the soup had cooled. Miss Verity Lorne, poor dependent and disappointed almost bride, had taken money from Lord Adrian Vexley and fled when discovered. The second arrived with a note from Mrs. Dacre, who had heard from a clergyman's sister that Verity had invented accusations against Lady Octavia Pell to secure the Duke of Caldermere's protection. The third came on Lady Thornfield's own card, written in a hand too controlled to be calm. Lord Adrian had asked that several concerned friends attend a charity assembly at Hanover Square in 2 days, where he intended to place certain facts before those whose good opinion had been unfairly disturbed. Verity read that last sentence twice, then set the card beside Mr. Pemberton's copies, the forged settlement note, the ledger page, and the torn scrap from her coat lining. The table in Lady Honoria's morning room had become a battlefield of paper. It was strangely quiet for a battlefield. No one shouted. No one wept. Lady Honoria sat with her spectacles low on her nose, sorting truth from rumour with the brisk care she might have used on household accounts. The Duke stood near the hearth, his face more still than Verity had ever seen it. That stillness worried her more than anger would have done. Anger moved. This did not. He means to make the accusation public, Lady Honoria said. Not merely whispered. Spoken in a room with enough witnesses to make retreat difficult. Verity looked at Adrian's name on Lady Thornfield's card. Then he must believe his proof will survive being seen. Or he believes most people prefer a convenient lie to a troublesome woman, Lady Honoria replied. He is not entirely wrong, which is why I dislike him so intensely. The Duke said nothing. Verity turned toward him. Your Grace? His gaze lifted from the fire. I can end this before the assembly. The room seemed to tighten around the sentence. Lady Honoria's mouth flattened. Verity felt the old pattern reach for her again. Not the Duke's cruelty. He had none in that moment. It was his certainty. His power stood ready, polished and immediate, and every frightened part of her wanted to let it do what power had always promised to do for women if they surrendered enough choice. How? She asked. His voice remained even. I can make it clear that any gentleman who repeats Vexley's accusation will answer to me socially. I can speak to the Marquis of Belmere. I can withdraw patronage from every club and committee that offers his son a platform. I can ensure Lady Octavia is not received in the houses that matter until she explains the missing correspondence. You could silence them. Yes. And what would society hear? He paused. That I stand with you. No, Verity said softly. They would hear that you are powerful enough to make questions impolite. A flicker crossed his face. Pain, perhaps. Or recognition. Lady Honoria went very still. Verity stood because remaining seated made the words feel smaller than they were. I know you mean to protect me. I do. But if your rank ends this before I speak, then the story becomes yours. Your anger. Your influence. Your decision that I was wronged. I would be grateful, and everyone would praise your honor, and somewhere beneath all that courtesy, my own voice would disappear again. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. The fire moved behind him, laying brief light along the hard line of his jaw. You are right. It was not easy for him to say. That made it matter more. I dislike being right when it frightens me, Verity admitted. Courage is often inconvenient that way, Lady Honoria said. The Duke came no closer. Tell me what you require. The change was small, but it altered the room. Verity looked down at the table and forced herself to think as she had in Lady Octavia's household, not as the woman they meant to shame, but as the woman who had corrected their mistakes before they became visible. I require witnesses who cannot be dismissed as sentimental, she said. Mr. Pemberton, if he will attend. Lady Thornfield, because it is her ledger. Mary, the maid who brought the coat, if she can be protected from dismissal. The footman from your house who saw Lord Adrian pursue me the night I left Lady Octavia's. Mrs. Hobb, who accompanied me in your carriage. And copies of every letter Mr. Pemberton sent to Pell House. Lady Honoria smiled slowly. There she is. Verity glanced at her. Who? The woman they should have been more afraid of. The Duke moved to the writing desk. I will send for Mr. Pemberton at once. My footman will give a statement. Mrs. Hobb will do the same. Lady Thornfield values propriety and her charity's reputation, so she will not enjoy discovering that her ledger was used as a stage prop. And Mary? Verity asked. If Lady Octavia dismisses her, I will place her in my aunt's household. Lady Honoria lifted a brow. You will ask me first. The Duke bowed slightly. Aunt, will you take Mary into your household if necessary? With pleasure. I enjoy rescuing competent servants from foolish mistresses. Verity let out a breath she had not realized she held. Then she saw the folded note half hidden beneath Lady Thornfield's card, the newest one brought by a messenger after dinner. She had not opened it yet because she recognized Adrian's seal and had wanted 1 minute of calm before touching it. Calm had passed. She broke the wax. The message was brief. Miss Lorne, if you possess any regard for the name you were permitted to bear in decent company, you will attend Lady Thornfield's assembly and apologize for your recent confusion. Refuse, and I shall produce your signed acknowledgement of money received from me. Do not force me to do publicly what I would prefer to settle with kindness. A. Vexley. Verity laid the note on the table. He says I signed an acknowledgement. The Duke's eyes hardened. You did not. No. Lady Honoria reached for the paper. The phrase permitted to bear in decent company has the stench of Lady Octavia. Yes, Verity said. She looked at the forged settlement note from Mr. Pemberton's file. The same false tenderness. The same habit of making obedience sound like moral rescue. The proof may be another forged note. Then we compare the hands, the Duke said. Verity nodded. But we must do more than show the letters are false. We must show why they needed them. The trust, Lady Honoria said. And Lord Adrian's debts. The Duke's gaze shifted. I have made discreet inquiries. Vexley has obligations at 2 gaming houses and 1 private lender. Nothing publicly ruinous yet, but enough to make marriage to an independent woman useful. Verity felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room. Useful, she said. The word had followed her too long. Then we show the room that useful was all I ever was to him. No, the Duke said. She looked up sharply. His voice softened, but did not weaken. We show them that he was wrong to believe usefulness made you his. Verity had to look away. Not because the words embarrassed her, but because they recognized a bruise she had not named. Lady Honoria closed the file with decision. Tomorrow we go to Lady Thornfield. Not to plead. To arrange the order of truth. Caldermere, you will make sure no gentleman interrupts Miss Lorne. I shall make sure no lady does. Miss Lorne will speak when she chooses. Verity looked from one to the other. And if they do not believe me? The Duke answered quietly. Then they will have to disbelieve the paper, the solicitor, the servant, the ledger, the footman, and me. That is a crowded lie to maintain. The next day moved with the precision of approaching weather. Mr. Pemberton agreed to attend, grave and apologetic. Lady Thornfield sent a note consenting to keep the ledger ready. Mrs. Hobb gave her account without embellishment. The Duke's footman confirmed that Lord Adrian had tried to follow Verity into the street and been stopped. By late afternoon, Verity's fear had not vanished, but it had acquired structure. That was better. Fear with structure could be carried. Near dusk, she went upstairs to Lady Honoria's guest chamber to prepare her grey coat. She wanted the seam left untouched, the torn place visible, the scrap kept safe in a separate envelope. She opened the wardrobe. The hook by the door was empty. For a moment, she did not understand what she saw. Then she searched the chair, the trunk, the folded gowns, the screen. Nothing. The coat was gone. Verity stood in the quiet room while the last light faded along the floorboards. Someone had taken the one object that tied insult, search, and hidden letter together. Downstairs, a clock struck 6. She placed one hand against the empty hook and felt, for the first time since she had walked out of Lady Octavia's drawing room, the edge of panic trying to enter. Then she closed her fingers around nothing and made herself breathe. No, she whispered to the empty room. You don't get to make me disappear with it. The empty hook by the wardrobe door looked too small to be cruel, yet Verity stood before it as if it had accused her aloud. A coat was not a fortune. It was not a title, not a home, not a promise. It was worn wool, mended lining, one ivory button, and a shape familiar enough to hold the memory of her mother's hands. Still, its absence hollowed the room. The grey coat had been the one thing she carried out of Lady Octavia's house by choice. It had warmed her on the pavement after humiliation. It had hidden the torn scrap that proved someone had searched where they had no right to search. Now it was gone on the eve of the assembly where Lord Adrian Vexley meant to call a lie proof. Verity did not ring at once. She checked the wardrobe again, then the chair beside the washstand, then the travelling trunk, though she knew she had left the coat on the hook because she had placed it there with the torn lining outward to remind herself not to mend what needed to be seen. Her hands moved calmly. Her heart did not. Miss Lorne? Mrs. Hobb's voice came from the doorway. The maid had brought warm water and stopped at the sight of Verity's face. Verity turned. My coat is missing. Mrs. Hobb set down the pitcher at once. The grey one, miss. Yes. I saw it there before tea. Did anyone come up? Mrs. Hobb thought quickly, alarm tightening her mouth. Only the laundry-maid to collect linen, and Mr. Cresswell brought a parcel to Lady Honoria's dressing room. No one should have entered here. Should. Verity had lived too long in houses where that word was treated like a curtain. Behind it, anything might happen. Please tell Lady Honoria. Mrs. Hobb went at once. Verity remained where she was, fingers resting against the bare hook. The panic came quietly, which made it worse. It did not shake her. It reasoned. Without the coat, Lady Octavia could claim the torn seam was invented. Without the coat, the scrap might seem planted. Without the coat, the room tomorrow could return to what it preferred, a poor woman's word against a genteel woman's injured dignity. Then another thought rose, more painful than the first. They had taken it because they knew what it meant to her. Not only as evidence. As memory. The door opened again. Lady Honoria entered first, still wearing her afternoon cap, her cane striking once against the floorboards. The Duke followed, having clearly come directly from the library. His expression changed when he saw Verity's hand on the empty hook. Not much. Enough. Who has been in this room? Lady Honoria asked Mrs. Hobb, who had returned behind them. No one with leave, my lady. With leave is doing too much work in that sentence. The Duke stepped into the room but stopped several feet from Verity, with the door open and Lady Honoria plainly present. Even in urgency, he remembered the shape of propriety. Verity noticed that. She wished she did not. Miss Lorne, he said, when did you last see it? Before tea. I turned the torn seam outward. I wanted it ready for tomorrow. Her voice held. She was grateful and resentful of that all at once. The scrap from Mr. Pemberton's letter is safe. In the envelope downstairs. Good. The coat was more than proof. The words came out before she had decided to say them. Lady Honoria's face softened, but she did not interrupt. Verity looked at the empty hook. My mother mended it when she was too ill to climb the stairs without pausing. She said a woman should mend what she could and release what she must. I thought I understood her. I did not. Not until I walked out wearing it. The room seemed to become very still. The Duke's voice, when it came, was lower. They have no right to use that against you. They already have. She turned to him then, and the composure she had worn for days finally cracked at the edge. Not into tears. Into honesty. I can bear being called poor. I can bear being called ambitious. I can even bear being called confused by people who depend upon my silence. But I am tired, Your Grace, of finding that every tender thing in my life can be turned into a weapon if someone else reaches it first. His face altered. Pain moved through the restraint and was mastered, but not hidden quickly enough. I am sorry. You did not take it. No. But I have been thinking of battles and evidence when I should have remembered that proof may have a pulse for the person holding it. That undid her more than grand comfort would have. Verity looked away, and for a moment the room blurred. Lady Honoria, with rare gentleness, sat near the window and busied herself with the ribbon on her reticule, giving them the mercy of pretending not to watch. The Duke drew something from his waistcoat pocket. Before I returned the ivory button to you, I kept it one night on my desk. Verity looked back. Why? He opened his palm. There was no button there now, only a small loop of grey silk thread, tied carefully around a folded piece of paper. A loose thread remained on my glove after I picked it up from the pavement. I should have discarded it. I did not. Her breath caught. That is absurd. Yes. Sentimental. Unfortunately. Ducal gentlemen are not supposed to be sentimental. I have tried to discourage it. A faint, broken laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound changed something in his eyes. He did not smile fully, but the severity eased. I kept it because that night I watched you choose yourself when everyone in that room expected you to choose shame. I thought if I forgot what courage looked like in its plainest form, I deserved the reminder. Verity stared at the thread, so small it should have meant nothing. Yet it meant he had noticed not the scandal, not merely the insult, but the act beneath it. You returned the button, she said. It was yours. And the thread. A theft of sentiment. I confess it under supervision. Lady Honoria made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been approval. Verity took the folded paper when he offered it. The little thread lay against her glove like a quiet vow. She did not know what to say, so she said the truest thing. I do not want to become the woman you rescue. I know. Do you? I am learning. He held her gaze. Tomorrow, I will not ask you to stand behind my name. I will not turn your vindication into my performance. If you choose to speak, I will keep the room from drowning you out. If you choose silence, I will honor that too. And if I ever ask you to marry me, it will not be because scandal has cornered you. It will be because you are free enough to refuse. Verity felt the word settle somewhere deeper than fear. They did not demand an answer. That was why they stayed. A knock came at the open door. Mr. Cresswell, Lady Honoria's butler, stood with a note on a salver and a face stiff with displeasure. This was left by a boy at the servants' entrance, my lady. He would not wait. Lady Honoria took it, broke the seal, and read aloud without ceremony. If Miss Lorne wishes her property returned, she will attend tomorrow and answer Lord Adrian's proof without hiding behind his grace. The coat will be produced where it can be properly understood. Silence followed. Verity's fingers closed around the grey silk thread. The coat was not lost. It had been taken ahead of her, carried like a condemned witness to the room where they meant to use it one last time. Lady Honoria rose slowly. How kind. They have saved us the trouble of discovering where it went. The Duke's voice was dangerously calm. They mean to stage it. Then we shall refuse the script, Verity said. The fear had not vanished. It had changed shape. That was enough. She folded the note and placed it beside the thread. Lady Octavia believes that if she holds the coat, she holds the story. She looked from Lady Honoria to the Duke, then back to the empty hook. Tomorrow, I will take both back. The next morning arrived pale and cold, with rain threatening but not yet falling. Verity dressed without the grey coat. Its absence made her gown seem too light, her shoulders too exposed, but she did not ask for another wrap until Mrs. Hobb brought a plain dark shawl. Lady Honoria inspected her once and nodded. You look like a woman who has made up her mind. It is a devastating fashion. Downstairs, the Duke waited beside the carriage, hat in hand, documents secured, witnesses summoned, and silence gathered around him like a promise he would not misuse. Verity stepped out into the morning air with Mr. Pemberton's copies in one hand and the folded thread in the other. For a moment, she thought of the first night, the pavement, the fog, the door closing behind her. Then she stepped into the carriage toward Hanover Square, not wearing the coat they had stolen, because the enemy had taken it there before her. This time, she would not need it to prove she had chosen herself. Lady Thornfield's drawing-room had never looked more polite or more merciless than it did when Verity Lorne entered without her grey coat. Every chair had been placed as if for music, yet no instrument waited near the pianoforte. Every lamp had been lit though the afternoon was not yet dark. Faces turned in careful waves, first toward Lady Honoria Rowe, then toward the Duke of Caldermere, then at last toward Verity, as if society required courage to arrive in order of rank before acknowledging the woman it had come to judge. Lord Adrian Vexley stood near the centre of the room with a folded paper in his hand and satisfaction arranged across his handsome face. Lady Octavia Pell sat beside a small table where the grey coat lay folded like an exhibit. Verity saw it at once. The wool was dull beneath the candlelight, the mended ivory button visible near the collar, the torn lining hidden for the moment by Lady Octavia's gloved hand. Something inside Verity clenched, then steadied. They had placed her memory on a table to make it answer for a lie. Very well. It would answer. Lady Thornfield came forward, visibly unhappy that her house had become a court without law. Miss Lorne, she said. Lady Honoria. Your Grace. I trust this matter may be settled with dignity. That depends, Lady Honoria replied, upon whether dignity has been invited or merely summoned. A nervous murmur moved through the room. The Duke said nothing. He stood near the door, not beside Verity, not in front of her, but where every person who wished to leave or interrupt would have to remember his presence. Mr. Pemberton had arrived already, grave and pale, with a packet of documents under his arm. Mrs. Hobbs stood with the Duke's footman near the side wall. Mary, the Pell housemaid, waited near Lady Thornfield's housekeeper, her hands twisting in her apron until Verity gave her a small nod. The girl stopped twisting. Adrian bowed with theatrical restraint. "Miss Lorne, no gentleman enjoys making private disappointment public." "Then you are unfortunate to have chosen a public room," Verity said. His smile tightened. "I chose clarity. You left Lady Octavia's house in anger after receiving assistance from me which you had no right to accept and no intention of acknowledging. Since then, you have attached yourself to His Grace's household and encouraged ugly suspicions against those who sheltered you." Verity felt the room leaning toward him, not because it loved him, but because his version required less rearrangement of the world. Poor women were often easier to doubt than polished men. Adrian lifted the folded paper. "This is an acknowledgement in Miss Lorne's own hand. It states that she received money from me and accepted my discretion in the matter." Lady Octavia lowered her lashes. "We wished only to protect her from exposure." The Duke's voice cut across the soft lie. "Lord Adrian, you will place that paper on the table." Adrian's eyes flashed. "Your Grace, I am addressing Miss Lorne." "Then allow her to see the weapon before you ask her to bleed politely." Silence fell hard. Adrian laid the note on the table. Verity walked forward. No one moved with her. She had asked for that. Her hands were cold, but steady, as she picked up the paper and read the words written in a near version of her hand. "I, Verity Lorne, acknowledge the sum advanced by Lord Adrian Vexley and regret any confusion caused by my conduct." The signature curved beautifully at the bottom, too beautifully. The L in Lorne opened wide, like Lady Octavia's taut version, not Verity's own. Verity placed beside it the note from Mr. Pemberton's file and her own signature written that morning. "My lord," she said, "this is not my hand." Adrian laughed softly. "A convenient denial." "No. A visible one." She turned the pages toward Lady Thornfield. "My true capital L closes narrowly at the lower loop. Both forged notes open wide. Lady Octavia taught me for years to copy letters with wider capitals because she called my natural hand too plain." Lady Octavia's cheeks colored. "This is absurd. Many ladies form letters similarly." "Indeed," Verity said. "Which is why I brought more than letters." She turned to Mr. Pemberton. "Sir, did you send correspondence to me at Lady Octavia's house?" Mr. Pemberton bowed, his voice clear though regretful. "I did. Several letters over 6 months, concerning Miss Lorne's maternal trust, which became accessible upon her 25th birthday." The murmur that followed was sharper now. Verity heard the word trust pass like a spark. Lady Octavia sat straighter. Miss Lorne was not in a condition to manage such matters alone. "That was not yours to decide," Verity said. "Did I authorize you to receive those letters?" "You were family." "Did I authorize you?" Lady Octavia's mouth tightened. She did not answer. Verity looked to Mr. Pemberton again. "Was a marriage settlement prepared naming Lord Adrian Vexley?" "Yes," the solicitor said. "Based upon a note purporting to express Miss Lorne's wishes. The proposed arrangement would have placed management of the trust under her husband's authority after marriage." Adrian's face lost color beneath its polish. The Duke remained motionless by the door, but the room seemed to feel him. Verity turned toward the small table. "Now the coat." Lady Octavia's hand moved over it. "There is no need to parade old clothing. You have already done so twice." The words were quiet. They landed. Lady Thornfield stepped in. "Lady Octavia, the coat belongs to Miss Lorne." Slowly, with a hatred too refined to show itself fully, Lady Octavia removed her hand. Verity lifted the coat. Its familiar weight entered her arms, and for one moment she almost forgot the room. Then she turned the lining outward. "This seam was cut after I left the coat at Pell House. The original stitching was my mother's. This darker thread is new." She drew from her reticule the envelope containing the torn scrap. "When the coat was brought into this room before, I found this caught inside the seam. It bears Mr. Pemberton's name and address." Mr. Pemberton examined it. "This corner is from my stationery." Lady Octavia rose. A scrap proves nothing. No, Verity said. Alone, it proves only that someone searched my coat for a letter from the solicitor whose letters never reached me. But it does not stand alone. She turned to Mary. The maid looked terrified. Lady Honoria's voice softened for the first time that day. Speak plainly, child. You are under my protection if your mistress no longer values honesty. Mary curtsied, trembling. Lady Octavia told me to take the coat to the music hall and give it over in the drawing room. She said if anyone asked, I was to say Miss Lorne forgot it. I didn't want to, miss. I thought I'd lose my place. You did as you were ordered, Verity said. Thank you for telling the truth. Mary's eyes filled, but she remained upright. Mrs. Hobb then confirmed the carriage ride to Mrs. Dacre's. The Duke's footman confirmed Lord Adrian had attempted to follow Verity into the street after she left Lady Octavia's house. Lady Thornfield produced the charity ledger with the forged entry in Verity's name. Each piece was small. Together, they made a wall no graceful lie could pass through. Adrian tried once more. This is all very affecting, but Miss Lorne has clearly been coached. The Duke moved then, one step only. Choose your next words carefully. Verity lifted a hand slightly. Not to silence the Duke, but to answer for herself. He stopped. The room saw it. More importantly, he let them see it. Verity faced Adrian. If there are 100 women like me, my lord, why did you need forged papers to keep this one? The silence was complete. Adrian's expression emptied. Lady Octavia closed her eyes, not in shame, but in calculation, finding no remaining door. Verity continued, and her voice did not shake. I was not confused. I was not ungrateful. I did not take your money. I did not ask Lady Octavia to manage my inheritance. I did not agree to marry you. What I did was leave a room where I had been insulted, and everything that followed happened because you both discovered I was harder to control once I had gone. Lady Thornfield's face changed, and with it the room's permission changed too. Miss Lorne, she said, you have my apology. My ledger was misused, and my rooms were used to embarrass you. I shall write to the committee tonight. If you are willing, I would be grateful for your assistance in reviewing the charity accounts properly. It was not applause. It was better. It was public trust placed where public doubt had stood. The Duke turned to Adrian. The House of Caldermere withdraws all patronage from you. I shall also inform the Marquis of Belmere that his son has used forged papers in an attempt to coerce a gentlewoman's fortune. Adrian swallowed. You would ruin me over her. No, the Duke said. You have done that yourself. I am merely refusing to hide it. Lady Honoria looked at Lady Octavia. As for you, I believe the trustees will wish to discuss withheld correspondence. I doubt the ladies' committees will enjoy having their ledgers associated with your methods. Lady Octavia stood very straight, but no one moved to help her. That was when Verity knew the reversal was complete. Not when Adrian faltered. Not when the Duke spoke. When Lady Octavia looked around the room she had meant to command and found no woman willing to meet her eyes. Verity folded the grey coat over her arm. The torn lining remained visible. The ivory button held. She walked to the door, and this time the room parted not from embarrassment, but from respect. At the threshold, she paused beside the Duke. He did not offer his arm before she chose. He simply waited. Verity looked back once at Lady Thornfield's drawing room, at the table of papers, at the people who had come to judge and stayed to witness. Then she stepped forward. She left with the coat in her arms, not because she had been driven out, but because she was free to go. 3 months after Lady Thornfield's drawing room fell silent around the truth, Verity Lorne stood in that same room with an account book open before her and listened to a countess ask for her opinion. It was not the grandest victory London could imagine, but it was the one Verity trusted most. Applause faded. Invitations could be strategic. Public sympathy often lasted only until a newer scandal arrived. But a woman's opinion being requested in a room where she had once been judged was a quieter and more durable kind of justice. Lady Thornfield's charity accounts had been rewritten under Verity's careful hand, every subscription confirmed, every receipt copied, every vague promise turned into a proper entry. No one laughed now when she asked for figures. No one called her exacting with that faint little smile that meant unfeminine. They brought her ledgers, letters, and questions. Lady Honoria Rowe sat near the window in violet silk, pretending not to be proud and failing with dignity. "You have made honesty fashionable," she remarked when the Countess moved away. "A dangerous achievement. Society may recover, but I have my doubts." Verity closed the ledger. "Society likes honesty once it has become safer than lying. Then let us enjoy the interval before it grows bored." Beyond the tall windows, late summer lay over London with a golden warmth that softened even the hard edges of Mayfair. The season had thinned, and with it the voices that had once carried Lady Octavia's version of events from drawing-room to carriage step. Lord Adrian Vexley was no longer invited where influence gathered. The Marquis of Caldermere had sent his son north to a family estate with creditors behind him and very few friends ahead. No duel, no theatrical ruin, no public shouting had been needed. Doors had simply ceased to open. That, in their world, was punishment enough to echo. Lady Octavia had left London first, citing health, then family obligations, then the need for quiet. The ladies' committees accepted her resignation with graceful speed. Mr. Pemberton and the trustees had reviewed the withheld correspondence, restored Verity's direct authority over the modest maternal trust, and arranged that no future letter concerning her property could pass through another person's hand. The sum was not vast by ducal standards. It was vast enough to change the way Verity woke in the morning. Independence did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived as a bank draft, a signed instruction, and the knowledge that bread purchased by her own right did not require gratitude to the person who handed it across a table. By September, Lady Honoria declared that London had become tedious and that Verity's health required country air, though both women understood whose nerves truly wanted relief from callers. The invitation to Elderwick Park came written in the Duke of Caldermere's own hand, addressed first to Lady Honoria and then, with perfect propriety, to Miss Verity Lorne. A small house party, he wrote. For guests besides his aunt. Mr. and Mrs. Dacre invited for a week. Mr. Pemberton to attend for one afternoon regarding settlement papers of a purely practical nature. Verity had held the letter for longer than necessary, reading the spaces between the words as carefully as the words themselves. He had not pressed. He had not pleaded. He had offered a door and waited to see whether she wished to walk through it. Elderwick Park stood in Hampshire, surrounded by rolling fields, beech woods, and long lawns that seemed to breathe after the tight lungs of London. The house was large without showing off, built of pale stone mellowed by time, with ivy at one corner and tall windows that gathered morning light. On her first day there, Verity stood in the hall beneath portraits of stern Rowe ancestors and felt no impulse to shrink. Perhaps that was because Lady Honoria marched beside her like a general in lace. Perhaps it was because Mrs. Dacre cried quietly over the beauty of the staircase and then blamed dust. Perhaps it was because the Duke met them at the door and looked not at the house, not at the guests, not at what she lacked, but at her face. "Miss Lorne," he said. "Welcome to Elderwick." "Thank you, Your Grace. I hope the journey was comfortable." Lady Honoria sniffed. "Comfortable enough. Your roads require discipline. I shall speak sternly to Hampshire." Verity looked away to hide a smile, and when she glanced back, the Duke's eyes held that small, private warmth he never spent carelessly. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Verity walked the gardens with Mrs. Dacre, reviewed a parish school subscription list at Lady Honoria's request, and discovered that the Duke's steward had the rare humility to appreciate correction when she found 2 duplicated rents in a summary. The Duke did not hover. He did not vanish. He appeared where he was expected, listened more than he spoke, and once, when a visiting baronet began to explain estate accounts to Verity with indulgent slowness, the Duke interrupted only to say, "Miss Lorne understands the matter. You may proceed at a useful pace." It was not gallant. It was better. It was confidence placed in her before witnesses. On the 4th morning, after rain had washed the lawns clean and left the air smelling of wet leaves and stone, Verity found the grey coat in the cedar press of her guest chamber. It had been cleaned, brushed, and laid carefully on a shelf lined with lavender paper. The torn lining had not been hidden. It had been preserved, the damaged seam bound so it would not worsen but still visible enough to tell the truth. Beside it rested a small box. Inside lay the loop of grey thread the Duke had once confessed to keeping, and beside it a pair of new ivory buttons, matched as closely as possible to the old one. Verity touched them with 2 fingers. She did not cry. She had learned that tears were not the only proof that feeling had arrived. Sometimes feeling was the stillness that came when one found a tender thing treated tenderly. A knock sounded at the open door, and Lady Honoria peered in without entering. "My nephew is in the morning room," she said. "He is attempting to look calm, which means he is in considerable distress." Verity turned, the little box still in her hand. "Should I be alarmed?" "Only if you dislike honourable men being made uncomfortable by their own hearts." Verity felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Lady Honoria." "Do not Lady Honoria me. I am old, observant, and almost always right." The morning room faced the east lawn, where sunlight lay in pale squares across the carpet. The Duke stood near a writing table, not by the hearth where he might look master of the room, not in the centre where he might seem to summon her, but beside a chair already placed for her. On the table lay papers, neatly tied. He bowed when she entered. "Miss Lorne." "Your Grace." His gaze moved briefly to the box in her hand. "You found it?" "Yes." "I hope I did not presume." "You preserved the damage." It was part of the truth. The answer nearly stole her composure. He drew a breath, then touched the papers on the table. "Mr. Pemberton has reviewed these. They are not an offer made under pressure. They are not a remedy for scandal. Your name is clear. Your trust is yours. These papers would protect that, should you ever choose to marry me." Verity heard the last words in the quiet room, and unlike the proposal he had almost made in fear, this one did not close around her. It opened. "Should I choose?" she repeated. "Yes." His voice roughened slightly, though he mastered it. "I love you, Verity. I love your courage, your precision, your refusal to be reduced to pain, and the mercy you showed even when cruelty would have been understandable. I do not ask to rescue you. You have already done the harder part. I ask whether you would allow me to build a life beside you." For a moment, she could not speak. The girl who had once been grateful for crumbs of attention stood somewhere far behind her, watching in wonder. Verity set the box on the table. "I will not be an ornament in your house. I would not know what to do with one. I will continue the charity accounts. I had hoped you would improve mine. I will keep my property in my own name where the settlement allows it. Mr. Pemberton insisted upon it, and I agreed before he finished the sentence." Her mouth trembled into a smile. "And if I disagree with you? I expect to survive frequently." The smile became real then. She looked toward the window, where Alderwick Park stretched green and quiet beneath the morning light. She thought of the pavement in Mayfair, the missing button, the coat on a hostile table, the room that had tried to rename her and failed. Then she looked back at him. "Then yes, Alistair." His stillness broke, not into triumph, but into relief so deep it seemed almost humble. "Yes? Yes. I choose you." He took her hand only after she offered it. His bow over it was restrained, almost formal, but his thumb trembled once against her glove, and that small betrayal of feeling moved her more than any grand display could have done. Weeks later, when the wedding gloves were placed in a cedar drawer at Alderwick Park, Verity laid the grey coat beside them, not as a relic of humiliation, but as a witness to the road she had walked. The mended ivory button held fast at the collar. The torn lining remained visible inside, a scar no longer hidden and no longer ashamed. Lady Honoria declared the arrangement sentimental and therefore tolerable. Mrs. Dacre wept openly and blamed the lavender. The Duke stood at Verity's side as the drawer closed, not to put the past away, but to honour that it had brought her here whole. Verity rested her hand on the cedar for one quiet moment. Once, she had picked up that coat because leaving was the only dignity left to her. Now she turned from it toward the man waiting in the warm light of home, and she stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because at last she had been given every freedom and chosen love anyway.